What would you do if the one person who finally made you feel alive again was the one person you were never supposed to touch? Lucas Bennett had survived divorce, single fatherhood, and 3 years of sleeping in a bed that felt too wide and too cold. He thought he was done with love, done with risk, done with all of it. Then one exhausted Tuesday night, one careless swipe of his thumb changed everything and dragged him straight into the most complicated, most painful, most beautiful disaster of his life. Drop your city in the comments. Let me see how far this story travels. The night it happened, Lucas Bennett was running on 3 hours of sleep, cold coffee, and the specific kind of quiet desperation that only single parents know. The kind that settles over a house at 11:47 p.m. when the dishes are finally done, the kid is finally asleep, and the man sitting alone at his kitchen table realizes, for the 100th time that week, that there is absolutely nothing waiting for him on the other side of this silence. His laptop was still open. 3 browser tabs. A freelance logo project for a brewery in Fort Collins that had been kicking his teeth in for 6 days. A grocery list he kept meaning to finish. And a Wikipedia article about asteroid mining that Sophie had made him promise to read after dinner, which he had absolutely not read yet. The apartment smelled like the chicken soup he'd made from scratch because Sophie had woken up with a scratchy throat. Nothing serious, just that thing kids do in late October in Colorado, their bodies staging minor rebellions against the changing season. She was fine. Asleep. Her stuffed planet Saturn was tucked under her arm. Lucas had checked on her twice. He did that. Checked on her. Even when he knew she was fine, he'd stand in the doorway for 30 seconds just to listen to her breathe. It was a habit left over from the worst year of his life, when he'd been terrified of everything he couldn't control, and the only thing that had felt real was this small person in the next room who needed him to still be standing. He rubbed his eyes and reached for his phone out of pure muscle memory, not because he was looking for anything, just because it was late and his brain was fried and the silence had weight to it tonight. He opened the dating app by accident, almost. He'd downloaded it 2 weeks ago after his buddy Marcus had spent 45 minutes at a bar explaining, with the solemn conviction of a man who had met his wife on the internet, that Lucas was doing a disservice to himself by not even trying. Lucas had downloaded it mostly to get Marcus to stop talking. He'd set up a profile with 2 photos, one from a hiking trip last summer, one of him laughing at a barbecue that Sophie had taken herself, slightly blurry, and then he'd opened the app maybe 4 times and closed it each time, feeling vaguely stupid about the whole thing. Dating felt like a skill he'd unlearned, like trying to ride a bike years after an accident that had left you with a new understanding of how hard the ground was. So he was half looking, scrolling without really seeing, the way you scroll when you're not actually hunting for anything, just moving your thumb because motion is easier than stillness. And then he swiped right. He didn't even fully register doing it. 1 second his thumb was moving, the next second the screen lit up with that little animation, the confetti burst, the "it's a match" banner. And Lucas blinked at the screen like a man who just accidentally set off a car alarm. "No," he said out loud to nobody. He looked at the profile, really looked at it this time. The first photo was professional. A woman in a sharp navy blazer, dark hair pulled back, standing in what looked like a modern office building with floor-to-ceiling windows behind her. She was striking, the kind of striking that made you look twice and then feel slightly dumb about the fact that you looked twice. High cheekbones, a mouth that looked like it was deciding whether to smile, brown eyes that were doing something complicated. Her name was Natalie. Lucas stared at the name. Something moved in the back of his skull, slow and cold, like ice water trickling down his spine. He scrolled to the second photo, and his stomach dropped straight through the floor. It was a different angle, more casual. She was laughing at something off camera, one hand raised to push hair out of her face. She looked younger in this one, less corporate. And without the deliberate composure of the first photo, he could see it clearly. He knew that face. Not her, exactly. He had only met her a handful of times, years ago, at holiday gatherings, and one tense family dinner where he'd been seated directly across from her mother. But he knew those cheekbones. He knew the angle of that jaw. He knew the particular way her eyes had that quality of watching everything in the room while appearing to focus on only one thing. He knew them because he'd been looking at a version of them across a breakfast table for 4 years. Natalie Hayes, Victoria's sister, his ex-wife's younger sister. Lucas sat very still for a long moment. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere outside, a car passed. He was aware of his own heartbeat in a way that was mildly concerning. "Okay," he said. He said it the way people say things out loud when they're trying to convince themselves that a situation is manageable. Like the word itself was a small fence you could build around something before it got out of hand. His thumb was already typing before he'd consciously decided to do anything. "Hey, I have to be completely upfront with you. I just realized who you are. That swipe was an accident. Total, complete accident. I wasn't paying attention. I'm really sorry for the weird situation. Please feel free to unmatch." He read it back once. It sounded exactly as awkward as the situation deserved. He sent it anyway. Then he put his phone face down on the table and stared at the ceiling. He thought about unmatch himself. That would be the clean move. Handle it on his end. Don't wait around for a response that would probably not come. Close the whole embarrassing chapter. Go to sleep. He did not unmatch. He picked up his phone again 4 minutes later. The message had been read. He watched the 3 dots appear. Disappear. Appear again. But, "Well," she wrote back, "that's one way to start a conversation." "What?" Lucas stared at his screen. "To be clear," she continued, "you do realize you're basically the last person who should be in my matches." "Oi." "Yeah," he typed. "I'm aware. I meant what I said. Totally an accident. You don't owe me anything here." The 3 dots again. Longer this time. "You know what's funny?" she wrote. "My sister would absolutely combust if she knew this was happening." Lucas felt something in his chest that was uncomfortably close to a laugh. He pressed it down. "Is that why you haven't unmatched?" A pause. Longer than the others. "Maybe," she sent. Then, "Or maybe I'm just curious what you look like after 3 years. Last time I saw you was at my cousin's wedding, and you spent the whole reception in the parking lot with a beer set." That was accurate. He'd been trying not to cry in the parking lot at his cousin-in-law's wedding, 7 months after Victoria had served him with papers, and he'd been somewhat successfully pretending to be a person who was fine and simply enjoyed fresh air. Apparently he had not been as subtle as he believed. "I was getting fresh air," he typed. "Okay. You were hiding," she replied. "I almost came out to check on you. Then Victoria told me you just needed space, so I stayed inside." Lucas put his phone down, picked it up. "You were going to check on me?" You looked like a man who was trying very hard not to fall apart in a parking lot. It seemed like the decent thing to do. But I didn't know you well enough to know if you'd want company or if you'd prefer to be miserable alone." He read that twice. There was something in it that landed differently than he expected. Not pity, just observation. The straightforward kind, stated plainly, without the cushioning that people usually wrapped around hard truths when they were trying to be kind. "For the record," he typed slowly, "I would have wanted company." Another long pause. "Well," she wrote, "it's 3 years too late for the parking lot, but I'm here now." They talked until 2 a.m. He didn't mean to. He'd fully intended to apologize, extract himself gracefully, and get some sleep because Sophie would be up by 6:30 regardless of what time he fell asleep, and she was going to want pancakes and a report on the asteroid mining article. But Natalie Hayes wrote like she talked, or at least like he imagined she talked, because he barely knew her, with this directness that didn't feel aggressive, just honest. She didn't fill silence with noise. She asked questions that were specific instead of generic. Not, "What do you do for fun?" but, "You said you do freelance design. Is that what you actually wanted to do or what you fell into?" He told her the truth, which surprised him, that he'd wanted to be an architect when he was 22 and had made 2 semesters of progress toward that before life had redirected him in the way life did. That he liked the freelance work, actually. That there was something satisfying about making something visual from nothing. That the hours were brutal, but at least they were his. She told him about the company. Briefly, matter-of-factly, in the way people described things they'd built themselves, Not with pride exactly, more with the exhausted ownership of someone who knew exactly how many walls they'd run into to get where they were. She'd started her first company at 26, sold it, started the current one. It had grown faster than she'd anticipated. The Chicago headquarters had 60 employees now. She was looking at expansion. "Does it feel like what you thought it would?" he asked. "Sometimes," she wrote. "Other times it feels like I built this enormous machine and now I have to live inside it." That's honest. You asked an honest question. He almost said something about Victoria right then, about how different this felt, this kind of conversation, this ease, but he stopped himself. It wasn't the right move, and it wasn't the right night. You didn't drag your ex-wife into a conversation that was going somewhere interesting at 1:45 in the morning. Instead, he told her about Sophie, not the curated version, not the "she's the light of my life" monologue that he'd learned made people's eyes glaze over after 20 seconds. The real version. Sophie was 6 and brilliant and slightly exhausting, and she had a better memory than most adults Lucas knew, and she had recently become obsessed with space to a degree that had required Lucas to educate himself on a subject he'd never thought much about. She asked questions that had no easy answers. She cried at things you didn't expect and was stoic about things that would make most adults fall apart. She made him laugh more than anyone in his life, and also occasionally made him want to sit on the kitchen floor and stare at nothing for 10 minutes. He loved her more than he had words for. He was also raising her alone and was acutely aware, every single day, of everything he might be getting wrong. "She sounds incredible," Natalie wrote. "Teats, she is. She's also 6, so she'll probably be insufferable for the next 15 years. "That sounds about right." And a pause. And then, unexpected, "Victoria never told me much about what happened after. Just her side. I always wondered about yours." Lucas sat with that for a moment. His kitchen was very quiet. "It wasn't dramatic," he typed finally. "That's what surprised me. I thought a marriage ending would be this enormous explosion. It wasn't. It just got quieter and quieter until we were basically living in parallel. And then she told me she wasn't happy, and I told her I wasn't either, and we were both right. The divorce was almost civil. The afterward was harder." "The afterward always is," she replied. Something in the simplicity of that settled somewhere in his chest. "Yeah," he wrote, "it is." He finally said goodnight at 2:17 a.m. "For what it's worth," she sent as he was closing the app, "I'm glad you swiped right, even if you were half asleep." Lucas smiled at his phone in his empty kitchen. It was the first real smile that had happened in that kitchen in a while, and he was alone for it, which felt both small and somehow significant. He checked on Sophie one more time on his way to bed. She was still breathing. Saturn was still tucked under her arm. He stood in the doorway for 30 seconds. Then he went to sleep. And when he woke up at 6:32 to Sophie standing next to his bed, asking about the asteroid article, his first coherent thought, before coffee, before coherence, before anything, was that he wanted to know what Natalie Hayes' morning looked like. That bothered him. Not enough to stop. The next night she messaged him first. He was sitting at his desk again, same cold coffee, different design project, a rebrand for a small accounting firm that had been fighting him for 2 weeks over font choices. Sophie was asleep. The apartment had its familiar late-night quiet. His phone lit up at 10:54 p.m. Question, Natalie wrote. "And you don't have to answer this. Are you actually on that app looking for something? Or did Marcus literally force you to download it?" Lucas stared at the screen. "Who told you about Marcus?" "Was. You mentioned him last night. The friend with the evangelical attitude toward online dating." He'd forgotten he'd said that. She retained things. That was either impressive or alarming, and he hadn't decided which. "Honestly," he typed, "I don't know what I'm looking for. I've been telling myself I'm not ready, and I'm not sure that's completely honest anymore. It might just be a habit." "Fear wearing the costume of wisdom," she replied. He sat up straighter. Where did you get that? My therapist. She's very good. Also very expensive. Does it help? The therapy? Moisen? Yes. Which is annoying because I went in thinking it wouldn't. Why annoying? Because it means I was wrong about something I was very confident about. I prefer being right. Lucas laughed out loud, quietly, in his empty apartment. The kind of laugh that surprised you, short and genuine and slightly helpless. I can tell, he typed. Tschüss, is that a problem? Not so far. Another night, 2.5 hours. The conversation moved in the way good conversations moved when you were tired and your guard was down, loosely, without agenda, doubling back on itself, landing in places neither of you had planned to go. She told him about the deal she'd almost lost last spring, a partnership that had been 3 months in negotiation, everything aligned, and then it had collapsed overnight over a clause that shouldn't have mattered, but did. She'd had to lay off 4 people the following week. She talked about it flatly, precisely, but something underneath the precision was still raw. How do you separate that? He asked. The business stuff from the personal when it goes wrong? You don't, she said. That's the thing nobody tells you when you're building something. You're told to be strategic and stay objective, but the truth is that if you don't care deeply about it, you're not going to build anything worth keeping. And if you do care deeply, it's going to hurt when it breaks. You can't have both. That sounds exhausting. It is. What made you choose design? Someone once told me I had a good eye. That was basically it. That's a pretty small thing to build a career on. Cent. Most things start small, he said. A beat. But okay. Yeah, she wrote. They do. Ichik. It went on like that, every night, or close to it, not every single night. Sometimes she went dark for a day or two, the demands of running an actual company apparently requiring her full attention, which Lucas respected and did not take personally, or tried not to. He was busy too. Sophie had a science fair project in early November that was threatening to consume his entire life. The brewery logo was finally approved. He took on a new project, a restaurant identity for a place opening in Rhino, which was exciting and immediately consuming. But the nights he did hear from her, something in him that had been held very carefully and very tightly for a long time started, incrementally, to loosen. He talked to her about things he didn't talk to anyone else about. The specific particular loneliness of single parenthood, not the absence of adult company exactly, but the weight of being the only person responsible. The way he second-guessed himself constantly. The fear that he was somehow, in ways he couldn't identify, screwing Sophie up. The grief, because that's what it was, even though he'd initiated nothing, even though the marriage had been dying long before it ended. The grief that still surfaced sometimes in inconvenient moments, like when Sophie asked why her parents didn't live together, and he had to find words that were honest and gentle simultaneously. Natalie listened. She didn't rush to fix it. She didn't tell him everything happened for a reason. She just stayed in it with him, in the conversation, present, and sometimes said something precise and true that made him feel less alone with it. In return, she told him things he got the sense she didn't share widely. The isolation of her position, the way people related to her differently once they knew what she'd built, either too impressed or too intimidated, and both responses created the same distance. The relationships that hadn't worked because the men she'd dated either felt threatened by her or wanted to be photographed with her. The quiet fact that she was 30 years old and had achieved most of what she'd set out to achieve, and still, sometimes, at the end of a long day, went back to her apartment and felt the particular silence of a life that was full by every metric and still missed something she couldn't properly name. You know what that is? Lucas typed, one night in late October when she'd described this for the second time. Tell me. It's the thing that no promotion can fix. The specific loneliness of being in a room full of people who see a version of you and not actually you. A long pause. Yes, she wrote. Exactly that. Then, blank. How do you know that? Because I've been in rooms like that, he said. My marriage was like that at the end. Two people performing a version of a life they'd stopped actually living. Does Sophie know who you talk to at night? He blinked. The question came from nowhere, lightly delivered, but it landed somewhere specific. No, he typed. I haven't mentioned it. Odd. Why? He thought about that. Because I'm not sure what to call it yet, he admitted. Gulped. Fair, she replied. Met. Then, after a moment, blank. I'm coming to Denver. Lucas's thumb went still. For work, she added quickly. We're looking at expansion out west. Colorado's on the list. My team's been pushing for it. I'll be there the third week of November. None. Okay, he typed. Tu? G? No. I thought maybe... She stopped. The three dots appeared and disappeared twice before the message came through. If you wanted to get coffee, real coffee, not just this. He looked at his screen, looked at the kitchen around him, the dish drying rack, the drawing Sophie had made at school that was stuck to the refrigerator with a planet-shaped magnet, a wobbly yellow circle surrounded by rings that were clearly Saturn, but rendered with genuine artistic commitment. He was terrified in a way he hadn't been in a long time. Not the catastrophic kind. The other kind. The kind that lives right next to hope. Yeah, he typed. I'd like that. Yum. The morning of November 18th was a Tuesday. Cold, clear, the sky that particular deep Colorado blue that had no equivalent anywhere else Lucas had lived. Sophie went to school in a winter coat that was technically a size too big because she'd grown 3 inches since February and he'd been slow to catch up. She'd given him a stern look about the coat situation just last week. He'd ordered a new one. It had arrived that morning, right after she got on the bus. He stood on the sidewalk holding the unopened coat box and thought about whether that was a metaphor for anything and decided it probably was and probably didn't matter. He drove to the coffee shop in Congress Park. His suggestion, a place he actually liked and went regularly, which felt important. He didn't want to pick somewhere he was performing. He wanted familiar ground. He arrived 9 minutes early, ordered a black coffee, sat down at a corner table, and then second-guessed the corner table and moved to one near the window and then thought about whether the window seat was too pointed, too much like a date, specifically positioned for visibility, and then caught himself thinking these thoughts and sat down firmly and stayed there. At 10:03, the door opened. Natalie Hayes walked in and Lucas Bennett forgot, for approximately 3 full seconds, how to be a person. She was taller than he'd expected. Or maybe it was the way she carried herself, that particular kind of presence that certain people had, the unconscious thing where they moved through a space and the space adjusted. She was wearing dark jeans, low boots, a camel-colored coat that was simple and clearly expensive. Her hair was down. She was looking around the room and hadn't spotted him yet. And for those 3 seconds, he had the strange experience of watching someone he felt like he already knew arrive somewhere for the first time. Then she saw him, and the thing that happened to her face, it wasn't a performance. It was just a person relieved to recognize someone. She walked over. He stood up. Hi, she said. Hi, he said. 2 people who had talked for weeks, staring at each other like they were starting from scratch. You look different in person, she said. Different how? She considered him for a moment. More tired, she said, but also more real. He almost laughed. That's a very Natalie thing to say. Something flickered across her face. You sound like you know me. I think I might, he said. Sit down. She sat. He sat. The coffee shop did its ordinary Tuesday morning thing around them. Espresso machine, someone's laptop music leaking from headphones, the murmur of other people's conversations. "This is weird," she said, looking at her coffee. "A little bit." In a... She paused. "Not bad weird." "No," he agreed. "Not bad weird." Has anyone ever told you that you're surprisingly easy to talk to for someone who claims to be bad at this? "I don't think I said I was bad at it," Lucas said. "I said I was out of practice." "What's the difference?" "Skill versus habit. You can have the skill and lose the habit. Takes a while to find it again." She looked at him steadily. There was that quality in her eyes, the watching everything while appearing to focus thing. Up close it was even more apparent. "And have you?" she asked. "Found it again?" He thought about the last 4 weeks, the late nights, the things he'd said to her that he hadn't said to anyone, the way conversations with her had this specific quality of not being performed. "Working on it," he said. She smiled then. Not the executive smile, the real one, the one from the off-camera photo in her profile. It changed her whole face, and he felt something shift in his chest that he was going to have to deal with at some point. They stayed for 2 hours and 40 minutes. He knew because he'd been intermittently aware of the time in the way you were when you had a pickup to make at 3 p.m. and the clock was moving in the wrong direction. They talked about the Denver expansion project, a corporate partnership she was negotiating with a manufacturing tech company based in Greenwood Village. She described the deal mechanics in general terms and then caught herself and said, "Sorry, is that incredibly boring?" And he said no because it wasn't. He liked listening to her think through problems. There was something clarifying about the way she organized information. She asked about Sophie, not in the polite question way, but in the genuinely curious way, remembering specific things he'd mentioned. The science fair project, the Saturn obsession, the business with the too big coat. "Does she know you were nervous to meet me?" Natalie asked. "She would have found it hilarious," Lucas said. "Were you nervous?" "I moved tables twice before you walked in." She looked down at the table. "I sat in the parking lot for 7 minutes." "Seriously?" "I had the radio on. I was trying to appear calm." "To yourself?" "To myself," she confirmed. He looked at her. She looked at him. "Why are we nervous?" he said. "We already know each other," she finished. "I know. But this is different. In text, you can take a second. Think about what you're saying. This is..." She gestured between them. "No buffer. Is that good or bad?" "I don't know yet," she said honestly. He appreciated that she didn't pretend. When they finally left, they stood on the sidewalk in the cold November air for an awkward moment that had a strange quality. Not uncomfortable exactly, more like the moment before something, the held breath. She had a meeting at 2. He had to get Sophie at 3. The arithmetic of both their lives. "I'm here until Friday," she said. "I know. We could..." She stopped, started again. "I'd like to see you again before Friday." He nodded. "Thursday," he said. "Sophie's at her grandmother's for the afternoon. I know this Mexican place that's legitimately the best food in Denver and doesn't look like much from the outside." "I like places that don't look like much from the outside," she said. "Yeah," he said. "I figured you might." She almost said something. He could see it, the thought forming, something more serious, the kind of thing you said when you were being honest and you knew it might change the texture of everything. And then she seemed to decide against it. "Thursday," she said instead. "Thursday," he agreed. She turned and walked toward her car. He watched her go the way you watch someone leave when you were already thinking about when you'd see them again, which was a feeling he had not had in a very long time, and which settled over him now like something he didn't have a word for, warm and terrifying, and completely, inconveniently real. He was standing on a sidewalk in Congress Park on a cold Tuesday in November, and something had started that he was not entirely in control of. He got in his car. He drove to pick up a new winter coat. He did not think about Victoria even once during the drive, which was notable because for 3 years, she had been the first thing he thought about whenever anything reminded him that his life had not gone the way he expected. He sat in the school pickup line with the engine running and the radio low, and he thought about the way Natalie's face had changed when she smiled, not the executive smile, the real one. And he thought about how she'd sat in a parking lot for 7 minutes trying to appear calm, and he thought, I am in so much trouble. He sat with that for a moment. Then Sophie came running out of school in her too big coat, her backpack bouncing, her face doing the thing it did when she'd had a good day, wide open, luminous, broadcasting everything. She yanked open the car door and threw herself into the back seat, and immediately began telling him about something that had happened at recess involving a disputed rule about Foursquare. Lucas turned the radio down and listened, and nodded, and responded at the right moments, and drove home through the cold Denver afternoon. And something in him, something that had been held tight and still for a very long time, was quietly, incrementally, beginning to come loose. Thursday came faster than Lucas expected and slower than he wanted, which told him something about himself he was trying not to examine too closely. He'd spent Wednesday in the ordinary machinery of his life, a client call that ran 40 minutes over schedule, a school pickup, Sophie's bath time battle, laundry, dishes, the nightly ritual of sitting at his desk after 9 p.m. doing the work that paid the bills. Normal. Familiar. The life he'd built from the rubble of the one before it. But underneath the ordinary Wednesday, something kept surfacing. The way Natalie had said, no buffer on the sidewalk outside the coffee shop, like she'd been turning that phrase over in her mind for a while before saying it out loud. The 7 minutes in the parking lot. The real smile. The one that wasn't for boardrooms. He caught himself at 11 p.m. holding a half-finished logo mock-up and realizing he'd been staring at the same corner of the screen for 6 minutes without seeing it. He went to bed. He didn't sleep well. Thursday afternoon, he dropped Sophie at his mother's house in Lakewood at 1:30. His mother, Carol, was a small woman in her early 60s who had strong opinions about everything and kept them mostly to herself, which was a combination Lucas had always found both maddening and admirable. She took Sophie's backpack at the door and then looked at Lucas with the specific expression she'd developed over the past 3 years. The one that was checking him without appearing to check him. You look better, she said. I always look fine, Mom. You look better than fine, she said, which was different. You eating? Sophie makes sure I eat. Carol looked at him a second longer than necessary. I'll have her back by 7. 6:30, he said. She has school tomorrow. She'll be fine for one late night. Mom. 7, Carol said pleasantly and closed the door. He sat in his car in her driveway for a moment, checked his phone. Natalie had texted 20 minutes ago. Still on for tonight? My 2 p.m. ran over. I might be 5 minutes late. I'll be there, he sent back. Take your time. The restaurant was called Marisol's, tucked on a side street in the Highlands that most people drove past without registering. From the outside, it looked like it might be a dry cleaner's that had pivoted unexpectedly. Narrow storefront, hand-painted sign, 2 small tables on a sidewalk that was perpetually optimistic about Denver weather. Inside it was low-lit and warm, the kind of warm that came from actual bodies and actual cooking rather than HVAC systems, and the smell hit you the moment you opened the door in a way that made your whole body slow down slightly. Lucas had been coming here since before his divorce. It was one of the few things from that era he'd kept. He was at the bar with the water and the menu he didn't need when she came in at 6:08, 8 minutes after they'd said, which meant she'd rushed. She still had the slight tightness around her eyes that a day of back-to-back meetings left on people, the kind that didn't fully leave until you'd been somewhere quiet for at least half an hour. Her coat was the same camel one from Tuesday. She spotted him at the bar, and the tightness eased almost immediately. Sorry, she said, sliding onto the stool beside him. The 2 p.m. was a nightmare. Everyone had opinions, and nobody had read the actual document. Classic. Tell me about it. She exhaled, looked at the menu. What's good? Everything, he said. Order the mole and whatever they tell you is the special. You trust strangers with food? I trust Rosa, he said. She's been cooking here for 22 years. She doesn't do specials she doesn't believe in. Natalie looked at him sideways. You know the cook? I've been coming here for 7 years. And you've never brought... She stopped. A small recalibration. Sorry, that's not my business. I brought Victoria once, he said, because it was true and pretending otherwise felt worse than saying it. She thought it was too loud. We didn't come back. A pause. Not uncomfortable, exactly. The kind of pause that happened when someone said a true thing that had some weight to it. Well, Natalie said carefully, I like loud. I know, Lucas said. You told me. She smiled at the menu. Right. I did. They ordered. Rosa, a compact woman in her 50s who had the energy of someone who'd seen everything twice, came out from the kitchen to say hello to Lucas and look at Natalie with the frank assessment of a person who made fast decisions about people and mostly stuck to them. She's better, Rosa said to Lucas, nodding at Natalie with no apparent self-consciousness about the fact that Natalie was right there. Rosa, Lucas said. What? She is. Rosa looked at Natalie directly. He comes in here alone too much. It's depressing. You want the guajillo or the negro? Natalie blinked. The negro? Good answer. Rosa went back to the kitchen. Did she just... Natalie started. Yes, Lucas said. I'm sorry. No, don't be. She was laughing now. I liked her immediately. Everyone does. She's terrifying. The mole arrived, and it was exactly what it always was, which was unreasonably good. They ate, and Natalie made a sound of genuine surprise at the first bite that she seemed slightly embarrassed by, and Lucas felt unreasonably pleased about this. They talked about the expansion deal. The Denver company she was in negotiations with had come back with a counter that was partly promising and partly infuriating, and she talked through it with the focused frustration of someone who genuinely loved the problem, even when the problem was being difficult. He listened, asked questions that were actually questions, not just social lubricant. She noticed. You're doing that thing again, she said. What thing? Where you actually listen instead of waiting for your turn to talk. Is that unusual? She picked up her fork. More than it should be. He thought about asking about her last relationship, but decided against it. Not yet. There was a version of this dinner where they cataloged old wounds, and that version felt too much like therapy, and also felt too much like moving towards something without being ready to land anywhere. Instead, he told her about the Rhino restaurant project. The client was a chef who'd moved from New York, someone with serious technique and strong opinions about visual identity, who also changed his mind every 4 days, which was the particular kind of creative client that Lucas had the most complicated feelings about. Infuriating to work with, genuinely exciting when it clicked. He'd shown her one of the logo concepts on his phone, and she'd studied it for longer than he expected, and then said, "The typeface feels like it's apologizing for something," which was so precise and so correct that he'd had to put the phone down. "Did you study design?" he asked. "No, I just look at a lot of things." That's basically design school. Don't tell design schools that. They stayed through 2 courses and coffee, and then Rosa brought out a plate of something small and sweet that Lucas hadn't ordered, and Rosa said simply, "On the house, because he never lets me do this for him," and went back to the kitchen without further explanation. Natalie looked at the plate and then at Lucas. "She feeds you charity dessert when you're alone?" "She calls it a hospitality tax," he said. "I've given up arguing." "You let her mother you." "Everybody needs someone to let them do that sometimes." She was quiet for a moment. Something moved behind her eyes that was not quite sad, but was in the neighborhood of it. "What?" he said. "Nothing." She shook her head slightly. "Just..." Another small pause. "I don't really have that. People who push through. Everyone in my life gives me what I ask for and assumes that's what I need. Because you're the CEO." "Because I'm the CEO," she agreed. "It's its own kind of prison, honestly. You build the thing becomes your identity, and then everyone relates to the identity instead of you." She looked at the dessert plate. "Victoria did that with me too after a while. Stopped seeing me, started seeing the version of me she'd decided on." Lucas was careful here. He kept his voice even. "What version was that?" "The one who had it together." A short, dry laugh. "The successful younger sister who made smart decisions and didn't need looking after. She was proud of me. I think she was. But somewhere along the way, proud and close stopped being the same thing." He didn't say anything immediately, just let it sit. "She and I haven't been close in a long time," Natalie said. It was stated matter-of-factly, but he could hear the thing underneath the fact. "Before you, I mean, before the marriage and the..." She caught herself. "Sorry, I keep almost making this about that. It's okay." "It's not entirely okay," she said. "It's a weird territory." "It is," he agreed, "but I'd rather talk about the real thing than dance around it." She looked at him, direct, appraising, the way she did when she was deciding something. Most people prefer the dance. I'm tired of dancing, he said. A beat. The restaurant noise moved around them. Somewhere nearby, someone was having a birthday. A low chorus of happy to you from 3 tables over, slightly ragged and completely genuine. Me too, she said quietly. They left at 8:45. The November air outside was sharp and clean, and their breath made small clouds. The street was mostly empty, amber light from the storefronts and the particular stillness of a Denver evening that had gone cold enough to send people inside. They stood on the sidewalk again. Same dynamic as Tuesday, the held breath quality of the moment before something. I'm glad I came to Denver, she said. For the expansion? For this, she said simply. No performance in it. He nodded. He was aware of how close they were standing. He was aware of a lot of things. I need to tell you something, he said. He'd been working up to this for 2 days, and it needed saying before whatever this was grew any further without the full weight of reality attached to it. This isn't casual for me. I don't do casual well. I never have. If this is heading somewhere, it's heading somewhere real for me. And I think you should know that before it goes further because of Victoria, she said. Because of all of it, he said. Victoria is part of it. Sophie is part of it. The fact that I have a whole life here that doesn't pause for anything. If you're looking for something light, I'm not... Lucas? Her voice was quiet but firm. I flew to Denver for a business meeting and spent both my free evenings with you. I sat in a parking lot for 7 minutes collecting myself before coffee. I haven't talked to anyone this much in years. She paused. Does that sound like someone looking for light? He exhaled, slow. No, he admitted. Okay then. She looked at him steadily. But I need to say something back. The Victoria thing, I need you to understand that's real. She's my sister. Whatever our relationship is now, whatever distance is between us, she's still my sister. And if this becomes something, that becomes something too. That doesn't go away. I know. And you're okay with that? He thought about it. Actually thought, rather than answering fast. I don't know if okay is the word. I think it's complicated, and I think it's going to stay complicated. But no. He met her eyes. I can't tell you it's not worth it, because I already know it is. She looked at him for a long moment. The street was cold and quiet, and the dessert Rosa had sent out was still somewhere in the back of his memory, tasting like something that had been earned. All right, she said finally. Not dramatically, just decided. She took out her phone and typed something. His phone buzzed in his pocket. I'm going to be in Denver for 2 more days. I want to see you both times. He read it standing 3 feet away from her, which she apparently found funny because she was already smiling when he looked up. Both times, he said. Don't make it weird. You texted me while standing next to me. I wanted it on record, she said. He was going to say something else, but then his phone buzzed again. His mother this time. She's asking to stay for dinner. Just dinner. I'll have her back by 7:30. He showed Natalie the screen without thinking about it, the way you did with someone you were already comfortable with, and she read it and raised her eyebrows. Your mom negotiates? Everything, he said. It's genetic. I like her already. Don't tell her that. She'll take it as permission. She laughed. Actually laughed. The full one. The unguarded version. He stored it. Go get your daughter, she said. Yeah. He didn't move immediately. Friday. I'll pick you up from the hotel. Okay. We can drive up into the mountains if the weather holds. Sophie loves... He stopped. Sorry, I should ask if that's... I want to meet her, Natalie said. Her voice had shifted, quieter, more careful, the way a person got when they meant something precisely and wanted it understood precisely. If that's okay, I want to meet Sophie. Lucas looked at her. There was something in the straightforwardness of it that undid him a little. Some small internal architecture that had been holding a specific kind of careful distance. Yeah, he said. That's okay. He drove to Lakewood and arrived at 7:26, 4 minutes before his mother's extended deadline, which he counted as a win. Sophie was in the living room with a book about the Voyager probes that Carol had apparently had on her shelf since Lucas was a teenager, and which Sophie was treating like primary source material. Dad, she said, without looking up, did you know Voyager 1 is past the edge of the solar system? Like, actually past it? It's in interstellar space. I did not know that, Lucas said. It launched in 1977, before you were born, and it's still sending signals. She finally looked up. How? Nuclear power, he said. Radioactive decay keeps it going. Sophie considered this. That's kind of sad. It's all alone out there. It's also the farthest thing humans have ever made, he said. Depending on how you look at it, that's pretty incredible. She thought about this for a long moment with the seriousness that she brought to every idea worth bringing seriousness to. Both things can be true, she said eventually. Yeah, he said, they can. He helped her with her coat, the new one, which fit properly, which she had greeted with a brief but sincere approval, and got her into the car and drove home through the Denver night with the heater running and the radio low. Sophie talked most of the way back, something about a hypothesis she had for the science fair involving water filtration that she'd apparently worked out with Carol, and Lucas drove and listened and responded in the right places. And he thought, both things can be true. The warmth of what was growing with Natalie, and the full complicated weight of what it meant. Both things, simultaneously. Neither canceling the other out. The Friday weather held. It was cold but clear, the Rockies sharp against the western sky as he drove Natalie up toward Evergreen, Sophie in the back seat with the Voyager probe book, and a playlist of what she called space music, which was mostly film scores with large orchestras and periodic dramatic swells. Natalie was in the passenger seat with the window down a crack despite the cold, watching the foothills rise around them. She's quiet, Natalie said quietly, tilting her head barely toward the back seat. She's reading, Lucas said. She'll surface when she has something to say. As if on cue. The asteroid belt is mostly empty space, Sophie announced from the back. People think it's like packed with rocks. But actually, if you flew through it, you probably wouldn't even hit anything. Natalie turned around. This was the first direct thing Sophie had said to her since a careful, assessing hello at the hotel pickup. How do you know that? Natalie asked. My book, Sophie said. She held it up. Then studying Natalie with that open frankness that 6-year-olds had before they learned to be cagey. Do you know a lot about space? Not as much as you, I think, Natalie said. Sophie seemed to weigh this response for honesty and apparently found it satisfactory. I know a lot about space for my age, she said without a trace of arrogance, just statement of fact. My dad says I'm an anomaly. Your dad's right. Sophie turned back to her book. But something had shifted, a small door, slightly opened. They stopped at a pullout above Evergreen Lake, with a view that Lucas had found years ago and hoarded like a secret. The water below was beginning to freeze at the edges, thin white reaching toward the middle. The mountains were enormous and close. Sophie immediately abandoned the book and went to the low stone wall at the edge of the overlook and stood with her hands in her pockets, looking out at the range the way she did sometimes. Not with a child's restlessness, but with something older, some quality of pure absorption that always made Lucas feel like he was watching her become someone. Natalie stood beside him a few feet back. She does that a lot, Natalie said softly. Looks at things? He watched his daughter at the wall. Yeah, since she was tiny. She'll just stop and look, like she's taking inventory. It's a good quality. Drives me crazy in parking lots, he said. We've missed a green light because she was looking at clouds. Natalie smiled. Then Sophie turned around and looked at Natalie with an expression Lucas had learned to pay attention to. The one where she was about to say something that had been composing itself for a while. Do you like space? Sophie asked. Direct. Verdict still out. Natalie walked over to the wall and stood next to her. Lucas stayed where he was. I think I like the idea of how big it is, Natalie said. That there's so much out there we can't see or understand yet. Does that count? Sophie thought about it. That counts, she said seriously. That's actually the most important part. What's the most important part? Knowing you don't know everything yet. Sophie said it with the confidence of someone who had recently been told this by a trustworthy adult and had fully absorbed it as truth. Lucas knew she'd gotten it from him about 6 months ago during a conversation about the science fair. He felt something that was part pride and part that particular ache of watching your child grow. I like that a lot, Natalie said. She wasn't performing warmth. She was actually there, present in the conversation, taking Sophie seriously the way kids could always tell when adults were faking and when they weren't. Sophie looked at her for another moment. Then she pulled out the Voyager book and held it out to Natalie. You can look at it on the drive back. There's a chapter about things we've discovered that don't make sense yet. It's my favorite part. Natalie took the book like it was being handed with care, which it was. Thank you, Sophie. Sophie went back to looking at the mountains. Lucas stood where he was with his hands in his jacket pockets, and something gathering in him that was not quite a feeling he had language for, something between gratitude and fear, and the specific ache of wanting something real enough that the wanting felt dangerous. The drive back was different, softer somehow. Sophie read over Natalie's shoulder as Natalie went through the Voyager chapter, occasionally providing annotations that were not requested but were entirely welcome. By the time they got back to Denver, Sophie had decided, in that absolute, unambiguous way children made decisions, that Natalie was acceptable. More than acceptable. She knows things, Sophie informed Lucas privately, while Natalie was getting her bag from the hotel lobby. But she's also okay with not knowing things. That's a good combination. Yeah, Lucas said. It is. He drove Natalie to the airport Saturday morning. They sat in the departure drop-off lane in his car with the hazards on and the Saturday morning airport chaos moving around them, rolling luggage, idling cars, the automated voice announcing things over the outdoor speakers in a tone of permanent mild urgency. She stopped, started again. I didn't know what this was going to be when I booked the Denver trip. What was it? She looked out through the windshield. Something I didn't expect. Something I don't know the shape of yet. She turned to look at him. But I want to know the shape. He nodded. Chicago is 2 hours, she said. I know. I'm not disappearing, she said. I want to say that before I get out of this car. I have a tendency to go quiet when I'm processing things, and I don't want you to misread that as gone. Okay, he said. And I have a tendency to assume the worst when people go quiet. So if you're processing, just tell me. I'll tell you, she said. Deal. Deal. She picked up her bag, opened the door, stopped. Sophie's going to grow up to do something extraordinary, she said. It wasn't a performance. It was just true, delivered like a true thing. I know, he said. You should be proud of her. Every single day. She got out, shouldered her bag, leaned down to look at him through the open door one last time. Neither of them said anything for a second. The airport voice announced a flight. I'll talk to you tonight, she said. I'll be up, he said. She closed the door. He watched her walk through the automatic glass doors until the crowd absorbed her. He sat with the hazards on for a moment too long, until the car behind him tapped its horn gently. He pulled out of the drop-off lane and into the Saturday morning traffic and drove back toward the city, back toward Sophie and the science fair project and the restaurant rebrand and the grocery list and the ordinary full life he'd built. His phone buzzed at the first red light. He didn't check it until he was moving. At the next light, he looked. Safely inside, she'd sent. Thank you for the mountains. He looked at that for the length of the red light, looked at the city around him through the windshield. The skyline, the November sky, the mountains still visible in the rear view, distant and permanent. Anytime, he wrote back. He meant it in more ways than he could count. The weeks after Natalie flew back to Chicago had a particular texture to them, full on the surface, complicated underneath. Lucas moved through his days the way he always did. Client work, school pickups, groceries. The science fair project that had evolved from a water filtration concept into something involving soil composition and plant growth rates that Sophie had decided was more interesting and also more important. He did all of it. He was present for all of it. But there was a channel running beneath the ordinary life now, something warm and slightly unnerving, and it had her name on it. They talked every night, sometimes long, sometimes short. A 15-minute call on the nights when her schedule had eaten her alive and she was running on fumes, her voice lower and more clipped, the sentences abbreviated. On those nights, he didn't push for more than she had. He just stayed on the line, and they talked about small things. What Sophie had said at dinner, what deal Natalie had closed or lost, or was still fighting. The mundane geography of two lives happening in parallel, two time zones and 1,800 miles apart, connected by phones they both held longer than they needed to. He flew to Chicago the second weekend of December. He almost didn't. The ticket was expensive and the timing was complicated. His mother had to rearrange her weekend, and Sophie had expressed her feelings about his absence with a silence that was more pointed than any argument, followed by a carefully casual, "I think it's fine, Dad," that was clearly not fine. He sat with Sophie the night before and explained it as simply and honestly as he could, that he'd met someone who mattered to him and that he wanted to spend time with her, and that nothing about that changed anything for Sophie. Sophie had been quiet for a moment. "Is this the Natalie from the mountains?" she asked. "Yeah," he said. "It is." Another pause. "She gave me her email," Sophie said, "so I could send her articles about space." Lucas blinked. "She did?" "At the airport, when you were getting her bag." Sophie picked at a thread on her blanket. "We exchanged contact information." He stared at his daughter. "You exchanged contact information?" "I have important things to say about the James Webb Telescope," Sophie said with total seriousness. She seemed like someone who would understand. He left for Chicago Friday morning with a feeling that was half nerves and half something quieter. The tentative hope of a man who had stopped believing in tentative hope and was now, reluctantly, revising that position. Chicago in December was a different animal than Denver. The cold there had an opinion about you. It came off the lake and found the gaps in everything: your collar, your cuffs, the 3 seconds between the cab and the door. He met Natalie at a restaurant she'd picked in the West Loop, somewhere that was clearly not chosen to impress, but was genuinely where she wanted to be, and that felt right. She was already there when he arrived, at a corner table, not looking at her phone for once, watching the room with that quality of attention he'd come to think of as distinctly hers. When she saw him come in, something in her face did the thing it did. Not dramatic, just honest, just real. "You came," she said. "I said I would." "People say a lot of things." He sat down. "I'm aware." They had 3 days. Not enough, and also somehow exactly enough. The compressed, concentrated way time worked when you were spending it with someone you were still learning. He saw her office on Saturday morning, a glass and steel floor in a building near the river. 60 employees moving through the open space with the specific energy of people who believed in what they were building. She walked him through it, matter-of-factly, pointing out the team leads, explaining the departmental structure without performance, just showing him the things she'd made the same way he might show someone the details of a design he was proud of. It was the least corporate tour he'd ever had of a corporate space, and he left it understanding her better. They cooked dinner at her apartment Saturday night. Or rather, Lucas cooked while Natalie sat on the counter and provided opinions about every decision he made, which turned out to be her version of helping, and which he found more entertaining than he expected. Her apartment was large and clean, with good art on the walls and bookshelves that were genuinely used, and it had the particular feeling of a space where someone spent real time rather than just slept. But it also had a quality he noticed and didn't say anything about yet, the way certain spaces felt when the person in them was slightly too self-sufficient, when everything was in order because there was no one to disorder it. Sunday, they walked along the lakefront in the cold for an hour and a half, without any particular destination, talking and not talking in roughly equal measure. The city was behind them, and the lake was the color of pewter, and there was ice at the edges of the breakwater. She told him about her first company, the real version, not the professional bio version, and there was failure in it, real failure, the kind you didn't put on a resume. A partnership that went wrong in the second year because she'd trusted someone she shouldn't have, and the restructuring that followed, and the 2 years of work that essentially disappeared. She told it plainly, without self-pity, but also without the false equanimity of someone who'd completely made peace with it. "Do you trust people easily?" he asked. "No," she said immediately. Then, "Except apparently you." He looked at the lake. "That's either a compliment or a warning sign." "Maybe both," she said. He flew back to Denver Sunday night. Sophie was asleep when he got home. He stood in her doorway for 30 seconds, listening to her breathe. Planet Saturn under her arm. Things were good. Things were actually, genuinely, quietly good, in a way that Lucas had not allowed himself in a long time. Which is probably why he was completely unprepared for what happened in January. He should have anticipated it. He knew that later when he was replaying the timeline, going back through the sequence of events with the helpless hindsight of someone trying to understand how they missed the cloud building on the horizon. Natalie had mentioned once in early December that she and Victoria talked occasionally, infrequently. She'd said it the way you mentioned a complicated truth you weren't entirely sure how to handle, briefly, with a slight change in her voice, moving past it quickly. He hadn't pushed. He should have thought more about what it meant. It was Victoria's cousin, Marcus Hale, not his Marcus, a different one, a man Lucas had always found vaguely exhausting at family gatherings, who said something at a holiday dinner in Chicago where both Victoria and Natalie were present. Something offhand, careless in the way that truly destructive things usually were. He'd apparently mentioned that Natalie was seeing someone in Denver, and when Victoria had asked who, the cousin had said he didn't know the name but that Natalie seemed happy about it. And something in the way he said Denver and something in the way Natalie's expression went carefully neutral in the half-second before she managed to speak must have triggered something in Victoria because she asked the question directly. Lucas didn't know any of this when it happened. He was at home. It was a Tuesday night in mid-January. Sophie was asleep. He was at his desk with the restaurant rebrand, which had finally gotten somewhere interesting after weeks of the client changing his mind. It was 11:23 p.m., and he was in the specific focused state of late-night work when his phone rang. He expected Natalie. The call was from Victoria. He stared at her name on his screen for 4 full rings. He answered. Victoria. He kept his voice even. Hey. Is it true? Not a question. The particular flat register of someone who has already decided the answer and is giving you the formal opportunity to confirm it. He closed his laptop. I don't know what you've heard. My sister, she said. You and my sister. He took a breath. Yes. The silence that followed lasted long enough that he checked the call was still connected. Victoria. How long? Still not questions. Statements with question marks behind them. Since October. Another silence. Then a sound he wasn't prepared for. Not anger, not yet. Something raw. The sharp intake of breath of someone who has been hit somewhere they didn't know they were vulnerable. October, she repeated. October. It didn't start on purpose, he said, and immediately heard how that sounded. I mean, don't, she said. Please don't explain it to me right now. Okay, you don't get to. Her voice broke slightly and then came back controlled and harder. I need you to understand something, Lucas. Whatever you think about our marriage, whatever story you tell yourself about how it ended, this is not something that just happens. This is my sister. This is my family. I know that. Do you? The control was thinning. He could hear it. Because it doesn't feel like you know that. It feels like you went looking for a way to make me feel what you felt, and you found the most direct route possible. That's not what this is. Then what is it? He stood up from his desk, moved to the kitchen. The refrigerator hummed. His hands weren't entirely steady, and he didn't know what to do with that. It's real, he said. That's what it is. I didn't plan it. Natalie didn't plan it. We were both. He stopped. Victoria, I'm not doing this to hurt you. Maybe not intentionally. Her voice went cold in a way that was almost worse than the heat. But here's what I want you to think about, Lucas. I want you to think about what it is like to find out that the two people you've watched build a relationship with each other, right behind your back for months, are now whatever you are. While I'm here being told I should have moved on and built something new, and instead I'm being. She stopped. Sophie, she said suddenly. Has Sophie met her? He paused 1 second too long. Lucas. Yes, he said. The silence this time was different, denser. You introduced my daughter to my sister, Victoria said, without telling me. She's my daughter too. Without telling me, Victoria repeated, and there was something in her voice now that was beyond anger, something territorial and frightened in a way that was worse than if she'd just been screaming. She's 6 years old, and you didn't think I had the right to know who you were bringing into her life? I didn't bring anyone into her life. They met once that you know of. The cold precision of it. How do I know what's been happening? How do I know anything? He didn't have an answer for that wasn't going to make it worse. I want to talk to Natalie, Victoria said. That's between you and. I want to talk to my sister. The word sister had a blade in it, and I want you to know that this isn't done. This conversation isn't done. What you've both done here isn't just, it's not something I'm going to smile through. Victoria, I'm not asking you to smile through anything. Good. Because I won't. She exhaled, sharp and short. You should know that I'm talking to someone about my options regarding Sophie. The floor dropped out of his stomach. What does that mean? He said. It means I'm looking at what I have every right to ask for. Victoria. His voice came out quieter than he meant it to, which was its own kind of alarming. Don't do that. Don't use Sophie for this. I'm not using Sophie for anything, she said. I'm protecting her. From what? From me? From an environment I didn't agree to. The control was back, full, precise. We have an agreement about major changes in her living situation, introducing significant relationships. You know that. You've dated people since the divorce, he said. I didn't. That's different. How is that different? It just is, she said, and he heard in the 3 words the irrationality of someone in pain making the rules as they went, which was something he understood because he'd been there too, 3 years ago, and he'd made some rules then that hadn't been entirely fair either. But understanding it didn't make it less serious. I'm not trying to fight you, he said. I know you're not, Victoria said, and for just a second, just 1 second, her voice sounded like the person he'd once known well enough to marry, tired and real and not performing anything. But I am, Lucas. Right now, I am. She hung up. He stood in his kitchen for a long time. His phone was in his hand. The apartment was quiet. He walked to Sophie's door and looked in. She was asleep, same as always, face slack and peaceful, Saturn stuffed animal still holding its post. 6 years old and completely unaware that the adults in her life were fracturing again around the specific, irreducible fact of her. He went back to the kitchen, sat down at the table. He did not sleep. At 7:12 a.m., Natalie called. She called me last night, Natalie said. Her voice was tight in a way he'd only heard once before, during the failed partnership story in Chicago, the part where she'd had to let people go. After she called you. What did she say? A lot of things. A pause. Some of them fair. Natalie. No, listen. Her voice was controlled, but there was something underneath the control that he couldn't entirely read. She said things that were unfair and out of proportion and came from pain, and I know that, but she also said some things that weren't wrong. We didn't tell her, Lucas. We let this grow for months, and we didn't tell her, and she found out from a cousin who heard it secondhand, and that's... She stopped. That's not who I want to be. We weren't hiding it. We weren't announcing it either. A flat honesty in that. I kept telling myself we'd figure out the right time. But there wasn't a right time, there was just time, and we let it pass. He was quiet. She's my sister, Natalie said. It was the same word Victoria had used, same blade, different angle. I don't know what we are anymore, she and I, but she's still my sister and I didn't handle this right. What did she say, specifically? A pause long enough that he thought she might not answer. Then, she said, I've been doing this my whole life, finding ways to have what she has. Or had. Her voice caught slightly. She said she always thought I was the one person who wouldn't. Lucas closed his eyes briefly. That's not what this is, he said. I know that. Quick. Certain. But it doesn't change how she feels it. Another pause. She mentioned Sophie. She mentioned Sophie to me too. The custody thing? Yeah. Silence on the line. He could hear Natalie breathing. When she spoke again, her voice was different, careful, like someone picking up something fragile. If this is hurting Sophie's stability, Lucas, if me being in this creates a legal fight that Sophie gets dragged into, don't, he said. I have to think about Natalie. He said her name with a firmness that surprised him. Don't finish that sentence, not yet. Not before we actually know what we're dealing with. I don't want to be the reason she gets hurt. You're not the reason for anything. Victoria's making a choice about how she's responding. That's hers. Don't take ownership of it. It's not that simple. I know it's not that simple, he said. I know. But I need you to not decide anything right now from fear. I need you to give me more than 24 hours before you... He stopped himself. Because he was doing a thing he recognized, holding on at the exact moment the ground was shifting, which was either courage or stubbornness, and he genuinely wasn't sure which. I'm not going anywhere, she said quietly. I just need you to know that I'm not pretending this is clean. Neither am I. Okay? The word was soft and exhausted. Okay. They stayed on the phone for another 40 minutes, not talking about solutions because there weren't any yet, just staying in it together the way you had to do sometimes when there was nothing to be fixed, only endured. Sophie woke up mid-call and came into the kitchen wanting oatmeal, and Lucas made it one-handed, phone pressed to his shoulder, and Sophie looked at him with the precise attention she applied to everything and said, "Are you okay, Dad?" And he said, "Yeah, Bug, I'm okay," which wasn't entirely true, but was as true as he could manage at 8 a.m. on 4 hours of sleep. The following weeks were some of the hardest since the divorce itself. Victoria's attorney sent a letter. Not a filing. A letter, carefully worded, outlining concerns about the stability of Sophie's living environment and suggesting that the current custody arrangement might benefit from a formal review in light of significant lifestyle changes. It was drafted to be technically cautious, but the intent was clear. Lucas read it 3 times at his kitchen table and felt the cold, specific dread of a man who understood exactly what was being threatened. He called his own attorney the same afternoon, a woman named Sandra Park, who had represented him through the original divorce proceedings, and who had the particular quality that good lawyers in family law developed, the ability to be simultaneously compassionate and completely unsentimental. "It's a letter, not a motion," Sandra said. "She's signaling displeasure. That's different from actual legal action. Could she win if she filed? Depends on what she files for and what she can show. Your arrangement is stable, you have good standing, Sophie's doing well in school. The introduction of a relationship isn't grounds for modification unless she can argue harm." A pause. "The fact that it's her sister is a complication." "A legal one?" "A human one," Sandra said, "which sometimes becomes a legal one. Judges are humans." "What do I do?" "Nothing rash," she said, "and nothing that looks like you're hiding anything. Document the good stuff. Keep the routine stable. Don't restrict Victoria's access in any way, and this is important. Don't let the situation push you into making decisions you weren't going to make anyway." He knew what she meant without her spelling it out. Don't end the relationship out of panic. Don't stay in it out of spite. Let the life be what it actually is. He told Natalie about the letter that night. He read it to her over the phone, slowly, every clause. She was quiet through all of it. When he finished, there was a long silence. "She's serious," Natalie said finally. "Possibly. My lawyer says it's a warning shot. But yeah, she might be." Another silence, and then, "I need to talk to her." "Natalie, not for you," she said. "Not to fix this for you or to make the legal thing go away. I need to talk to my sister because she is my sister, and because whatever is happening between us, the two of us, has been sitting unsaid for years, and I've let it sit because it was easier, and I'm done letting things sit because it's easier." He was quiet. "Is that okay with you?" she said. "It's not mine to be okay or not okay with," he said. "It's yours." "I'm asking anyway." "Then yes," he said. "It's okay." She called Victoria 3 days later. Lucas wasn't on the call. He didn't ask what was said, and Natalie didn't tell him everything. She told him the shape of it, which was enough. That she'd said she was sorry for how it came out, for the cousin and the secondhand reveal, for the months of not being honest. That she'd told Victoria the truth about how it started. The absurd accident of the swipe. The conversations. The slow growth of something she hadn't expected and hadn't sought. That she'd told Victoria she knew it hurt, and that the hurt was real. And that she wasn't asking Victoria to be happy about it, and that Victoria had said things in return that were not kind, and some of which were not fair, and that Natalie had stayed in the conversation anyway. "How was it?" Lucas asked. "Hard," she said. "Necessary." A pause. She cried. I cried. It was not a good phone call by any conventional measure. But it was real," she said. "The first real conversation we've had in I don't know how long. She's in a lot of pain, Lucas. Not just about this. She's been in pain for a while and she hasn't told anyone." He thought about Victoria, the person he'd known for 6 years, been married to for 4, the ways he'd failed to see what she was carrying during the marriage, and the ways she'd failed to show him. The strange grief of caring about someone you no longer understood. "Is she going to be okay?" he asked. I don't know, Natalie said, but I think she needed to say what she said, and I needed to hear it. February came. The custody letter did not become a filing. Victoria and Lucas had one brief, strained phone call in which they discussed Sophie's spring schedule and did not discuss anything else. It was not warm, but it was functional. And functional was what Sophie needed, and Lucas held on to that. Sophie was having the best year of her academic life, which helped. Her science fair project placed second in the school competition. She was livid about not placing first, which Lucas found both alarming and completely unsurprising. And her teacher sent home a note saying Sophie had an exceptional scientific mind and should be encouraged in every possible direction. Lucas read that note 3 times. He put it on the refrigerator next to the Saturn drawing. Natalie came back to Denver in February. Not for business this time. She flew in on a Friday evening. No meetings scheduled, just 4 days. She brought Sophie an astronomy book she'd been hunting for online for 3 weeks, a rare out-of-print volume about the history of space telescopes that Sophie received with the reverence of someone being handed a primary document. She also brought a meteorite display piece, a small polished cross-section mounted in a case with a museum-quality label, actual iron-nickel meteorite, the kind that had been floating in space for 4 billion years before ending up in Sophie's hands. Sophie stared at it for a full minute without speaking. Then she looked up at Natalie. "This was in space," she said. "For a long time," Natalie said. "I thought you should have it." Sophie held the case carefully in both hands. "Thank you," she said, very seriously. And then, because she was 6, and also because she was Sophie, "This is the best present I've ever received in my life." Lucas was standing in the kitchen doorway watching this happen, and he felt the complicated truth of the moment fully, without softening it. The warmth of it, and the fear underneath the warmth. The old ache and the new one, everything that was still unresolved, Victoria and the letter and the phone calls that had gone badly and the ones that hadn't happened yet. He felt all of it, and he did not look away from any of it, because that was the only way through anything that was real. You didn't get to choose which parts you felt. You only got to choose what you did with them. That evening, after Sophie was asleep with the meteorite display on her nightstand next to the Saturn stuffed animal, a lineup that seemed to Lucas like a small and perfect self-portrait of his daughter. He and Natalie sat on the back porch with the cold February air and the city lights low beyond the rooftops, and 2 cups of coffee going cold in their hands. She leaned against his shoulder. It was the first time. Small, unceremonious, just the weight of her against him in the cold, and he put his arm around her and they stayed like that without saying anything for a long time. The city doing its quiet, ongoing thing below them. "Is this going to be okay?" she asked. Not the legal thing, not the Victoria thing. This, them. The shape of what they were becoming. He thought about Sophie's voice in the car. Both things can be true. He thought about Voyager 1 out past the edge of the solar system, still sending its signal through the dark. He thought about a parking lot 3 years ago where he'd stood with a beer trying not to fall apart, and someone inside had almost come out to check on him. "I don't know what okay looks like yet," he said honestly, "but I think we're supposed to find out." She didn't say anything to that. She just stayed against his shoulder. Above them, the February sky was clear and hard and full of things too far away to see properly. Spring came to Denver the way it always did, arguing with winter for 3 weeks before finally winning, the temperature swinging 20 degrees in a single day, the mountains still white-capped while the city sidewalks ran with snowmelt and new mud. Lucas had always liked this time of year for its stubbornness, the way nothing surrendered easily, the way the season had to be fought for before it arrived. March moved through his life like that too, hard-won and uncertain. The custody letter had not become a filing. That was the practical truth, the one Sandra Park had confirmed in a brief mid-February call. No motion had been entered, no court date requested. The letter had done its work as a warning shot and nothing had escalated beyond it. Lucas should have felt relief at that news, and he did, technically, the way you felt relief when a car swerved close to you on the highway and didn't make contact. The danger had been real. The miss didn't erase the memory of it. He and Victoria had settled into something that wasn't peace exactly, but was functional. The careful practice choreography of 2 people co-parenting a child they both loved across the fault lines of a marriage that had ended badly and was now getting more complicated. They communicated through texts about Sophie's schedule, her school events, The pediatrician appointment in March where Sophie informed the doctor that she was planning to study astrophysics, and the doctor had said that was wonderful, and Sophie had corrected him. She was planning to do it, not just study it, and there was a difference. Lucas had relayed this to Natalie that night over the phone, and she'd laughed so hard she'd had to put the call on mute for 30 seconds. It was the small things that were holding him together. The nightly calls, the texts from Sophie's school, the meteorite display on his daughter's nightstand that Natalie had hunted down and shipped and delivered in person. The way a life that had been narrow and internal for 3 years was quietly, incrementally expanding again. But Natalie was still in Chicago. That was the weight under everything, the geography of it, the specific difficulty of building something real across 1,800 miles when both people involved had lives that didn't pause for anything. The phone calls were good. The visits were better. Neither was enough, and they both knew it. And neither of them had said it directly yet, because saying it directly meant the conversation that came after it, and that conversation was large. Lucas was aware, as the way he was aware of most important things, slowly, from the periphery, before it moved to the center, that something had to change. He just didn't know yet which direction the change would come from. Whether he'd be the one to suggest it, whether she would. Whether the whole arrangement would simply plateau here, and slowly, quietly, painfully become something they could not maintain. He was thinking about this on a Wednesday morning in late March, sitting at his desk with a cold coffee and a design project he was not focusing on, when his phone rang and Natalie's name appeared and something in the specific timing, not her usual late evening call, not a scheduled thing, 10:23 in the morning on a weekday, told him this was different before he picked up. "Hey," he said. "Are you sitting down?" she said. "I'm at my desk." "Okay." A pause. Not the processing kind, the preparing kind. The Denver expansion is moving forward. The board approved the full project 2 weeks ago. We've been working through the structure, and they want a dedicated division head based here. Not remote, not split time, permanently based in Denver. He was very still. "They offered it to me," she said. He didn't say anything for a moment. His desk was exactly the same as it had been 20 seconds ago. The coffee was still cold. The design project was still open. Everything was identical and completely different. "They offered it to you," he said. "Yesterday. Officially." Another pause. "I asked for a week to think about it." "How long have you known this was possible?" "A few weeks," she said. "I didn't want to say anything until it was real, until I knew what it actually was." He understood that. He also felt the thing underneath the understanding, the weeks of calls where she'd known and hadn't said, and the particular loneliness of sitting with a large thing alone. But he pressed that down because this wasn't the moment for it. "What are you thinking?" he said. She exhaled. "I'm thinking that I built the Chicago office from scratch. I know every person in that building. I know the work. I know the rhythms." A pause. "I'm also thinking that I've been flying to Denver every 3 weeks, and I still don't feel like I'm there enough." "What does that mean?" "It means—" She stopped. He could hear her moving, the particular sound of her pacing that he'd learned over months of phone calls, the slight change in the acoustic when she was walking. "It means I'm not good at saying things like this. I'm good at decisions. I'm good at strategy. I'm bad at—" Another stop. "Lucas, I want to be there. Not as a business decision. I want to be there because that's where you are and where Sophie is. And I'm sitting in my apartment in Chicago, and most of my good moments are on the phone with you, and I'm 45 years old and—" "30, he said. "What?" "You're 30. You told me. In October." A short breath. "Right. I'm 30 years old, and I'm sitting in a very nice apartment alone, and the thing I'm looking forward to is not this apartment." She said it simply, plainly, with the same directness that had pulled him in from the beginning. "I want to say yes to Denver, but I needed to say it to you first, before the board, before anyone. You." He sat at his desk in his apartment in Congress Park, Denver, Colorado. The mountains were visible from his window on clear days. Today was clear, and they were there, distant and blue-gray and permanent. Sophie had left for school 2 hours ago. The apartment smelled like the coffee he'd made too early and let go cold. "Natalie," he said, You don't have to say anything right now. Natalie. He said it again, quieter. Say yes. Silence. It's not, she was careful. It's not simple. I'm not moving to Denver for a relationship. That's not, I'm a real person with a real company, and this is a real business decision, and I can't just, I know, he said. I know that's true, and I know you know the difference. Say yes to the business decision, and come be near us. A long pause, the longest he'd heard from her. Okay, she said. Yeah? Yeah. Something in her voice had shifted. Relief, maybe, or the release of something that had been held tightly. Okay. He put his hand flat on his desk like he needed to confirm the surface was still there. Okay, he said back. They stayed on the phone for another hour, not about the decision anymore. That had been made, it was done, but about the practical geography of it. The timeline, 3 months minimum to transition. The apartment situation. She'd need to find something. The hotel wasn't a plan. Sophie's reaction. Lucas said he'd tell her this week, and he was about 80% sure she'd received the news as obvious and correct, and wonder why it had taken everyone so long to arrange. When they hung up, he sat for another 10 minutes at his desk without working. Not processing exactly. More like the thing that happened when something large settled into place. The quiet after. The stillness that wasn't emptiness. He called Marcus. She's moving here, Lucas said when Marcus picked up. A beat. Natalie? She's taking a permanent position in Denver. She's moving here. Man. Marcus was quiet for a second. How do you feel? Lucas looked out the window at the mountains, like someone just removed a weight I'd gotten used to carrying. That's good, right? Yeah, he said. That's good. He told Sophie that evening at dinner. He'd made pasta, her current preferred food, which rotated every few months and was currently in a serious fusilli phase, and he waited until they were both eating because Sophie processed things better when her hands were occupied. So, he said, I have something to tell you. Sophie looked up. She had sauce on her chin. Is it about Natalie? He stared at her. How do you always do that? You have a specific face, she said, for news about Natalie. It's different from your work face. I have a Natalie face? It's a little bit nervous and a little bit like you got a good grade, Sophie said, with the candid precision of a child who had been observing adults her whole life and cataloging the data. What is it? She's moving to Denver, he said, for work, but also because she wants to be closer to us. Sophie considered this while chewing, a full 30 seconds of genuine consideration, which was more than most adults gave important information. Is she going to live here? She asked. No, she'll have her own place. But close? Probably, yeah. Another pause. Does Mom know? Lucas put his fork down. Not yet. I'm going to tell her. Sophie looked at her pasta. Mom doesn't like it, she said quietly. That you and Natalie are whatever you are. I know, Bug. Is that going to be a problem? He thought about Sandra Park's advice. Document the good stuff. Keep the routine stable. Let the life be what it actually is. He thought about the February porch and Natalie's weight against his shoulder, and both things can be true. It's complicated, he said, but I don't want you to worry about it. That's my thing to handle. Your thing is pasta and space telescopes. Sophie almost smiled. Those are very different things. Both important. She picked her fork back up. I'm glad she's coming, she said, with the simplicity of someone for whom the conclusion had been obvious for a while. She emails me. Did you know that? About space? About space and other things, Sophie said. She's good at asking questions. Most adults just tell you things. She actually wants to know. He looked at his daughter across the kitchen table, the sauce on her chin, the absolute certainty in her voice, the Voyager probe book propped against the fruit bowl because she'd been reading it at lunch. 6 years old and more perceptive than most people he knew. Yeah, he said, she is. He called Victoria the following Saturday. He'd thought carefully about how to do this. Not texting, not having it come from somewhere else, not letting the cousin situation happen again in any version. He picked up the phone and called her directly and told her plainly. Victoria was quiet for a moment. When? She said. 3 months, roughly. She'll be in Denver. Permanently. Yes. A pause that stretched long enough that he measured it against his own breathing. Then, I see. Victoria, I'm telling you directly because I don't want... I appreciate that, she said, clipped and precise. I do. She stopped. Give me a minute. He waited. When she came back, her voice was controlled in the way that took effort. I'm not going to pretend this is easy for me to hear. It's not. You know it's not. I know. But I also... Another stop. Longer. He could hear her working through something on her end, the sounds of her apartment in the background, something she was putting down on a counter. I've been talking to someone, a therapist, since January. He hadn't known that. Okay, she's helped me see some things I wasn't seeing clearly. A pause. I don't want to fight about Natalie's presence in Sophie's life. I don't want to be the person who does that. I said some things in January I'm not proud of. He was careful. You were in pain. I'm still in pain, she said flatly. But pain doesn't make everything you do while you're in it correct. A short breath. The custody thing. The letter. I want you to know I didn't follow through on it because Sandra Park would have eaten my attorney alive, not because... She stopped. Started again. No, that's not true. I didn't follow through because Sophie doesn't need that. She needs stability. She needs both of us not tearing things apart. Victoria. I'm not saying I'm fine with this, she said, and the rawness was there again under the precision, the part of her that was still hurting in ways that had started long before any of this. I want to be honest with you. Part of what I feel is not about you and Natalie specifically. It's about where my life is. Watching someone else step into things, She cut herself off. That's mine to work out, not yours. No, he said quietly, but it matters. And I'm sorry for the parts I contributed to. A long pause. Different from the others. Something moving in it that was not quite forgiveness, but was something in that direction. Two people who had run out of energy for the particular brand of war they'd been waging and were setting down their specific weapons. Not because everything was resolved, but because the weapons were heavy and the damage was real and there was a 6-year-old girl who needed them to put them down. Just make sure Sophie knows she can tell me anything, Victoria said finally. About Natalie. About all of it. I don't want her managing my feelings. She won't, he said. I'll make sure of it. Okay? A breath. Okay. They hung up. He sat in his car. He'd taken the call in the parking lot of a grocery store, some instinct toward neutral ground, and looked at the shopping cart return station in front of him for a while without seeing it. Nothing was fixed. He knew that. Victoria was still in pain. The complications of what he and Natalie were building hadn't disappeared because a custody letter hadn't been filed. There would be more hard conversations. There would be moments he hadn't anticipated. There would be all the ongoing, ordinary difficulty of a life that had real people in it, with real histories and real wounds that didn't fully close. But something had shifted. He could feel it even from a parking lot. Something that had been locked down, braced, waiting for impact, had loosened 1 degree. Not safe. Just less like a collision was imminent. He went inside and bought groceries. He remembered everything on the list. The 3 months passed the way significant time did, both too slowly and all at once. Natalie's transition was not simple. She was handing off an office she'd built from 6 people to 60, an infrastructure that was woven around her knowledge and judgment, and the process of disentangling herself from the day-to-day without destroying what she'd made required the kind of precise, unglamorous work that didn't make for interesting stories but took everything you had. She called him tired most nights in April and May, not unhappy. Tired in the way of someone doing something that mattered and was costing something, which she'd told him once was the only kind of tired that felt honest. She found an apartment in Capitol Hill, not Congress Park, not on top of him, some of it deliberate. She needed her own space. She'd told him that directly, and he'd agreed with it directly, and they'd both appreciated that they were the kind of people who could say that to each other. The apartment was on the 4th floor of a building from the 1920s that had been renovated without losing the bones. High ceilings, casement windows, the old hardwood floors that creaked with that specific quality of age. She sent him a photo of the empty living room on the day she signed the lease, and he'd looked at it for a while. The blank white walls, the afternoon light coming in, the beginning of something quality of an empty room. He started leaving one night a week for her. A Tuesday or Wednesday when his mother or a neighbor could sit with Sophie. Not overnight. He wasn't ready to navigate that conversation yet, and neither was she. Just an evening, 4 or 5 hours, the ordinary intimate geography of two people learning how to be near each other without the buffer of distance or time limits or the compressed intensity of a weekend visit. They cooked together, badly, and then incrementally better. They watched things on her television and argued about them. They fell into the rhythms of proximity, where each person put things, what temperature, the negotiation of small domestic habits that was its own language of closeness. It was not uncomplicated. He was still in the habit of self-sufficiency. 3 years of being the only adult in his household had built grooves in him that didn't smooth out just because someone was now present. He caught himself sometimes retreating in small ways, going quiet when he was stressed rather than saying he was stressed, handling things alone when she'd offered to help. The old armor worn so long it had started to feel like skin. She called him on it once, directly, the way she called things. "You're doing the thing," she said. They were in her kitchen, mid-May, and he'd been monosyllabic for an hour and was now aggressively washing dishes. What thing? The closed-off thing, the "I'm fine, watch me be fine" thing. He kept washing. "I'm just washing dishes." "Lucas." He put the dish down, turned the water off, stood there with his hands on the edge of the sink for a moment. "The Greenfield project fell through," he said. A client he'd been developing a major rebrand for. 3 months of work, a significant contract, the largest single project he'd taken on since going freelance. The client had called that morning and terminated without real explanation. The particular gutting experience of creative freelance work where you could build everything and still lose the job. "I found out this morning." "I know," she said. He turned around. "What?" "You got the call at 8:47. You told me you had a call at 8:30. You've been quiet since 10 a.m. I can do math." She was leaning against the counter, not angry, just watching him with the specific attention that he had stopped being able to hide from. "I was waiting for you to say something. You knew all afternoon. I was giving you time. And when I didn't say anything, then I said something," she said. "Because that's what you're supposed to do. That's the whole thing, Lucas. You can just tell me. You don't have to carry it first and then present it when it's manageable." He looked at her. The kitchen was small, and they were both standing in it, and the evening light was coming through the casement windows at that particular angle it did in late May, long and gold. "I know," he said. "I'm still learning that." "I know you are," she said it without impatience. "I'm still learning things too. I nearly sent you a 47-point action plan to replace the lost revenue when you first told me you had a call scheduled." "Did you?" "I wrote it," she said. "I deleted it because that's not what you needed." He almost laughed. "You wrote a 47-point plan." 43. "I started strong and ran out of points." A small smile. The impulse was there. The execution was not. He crossed the kitchen and leaned against the counter next to her. They stood side by side, looking at nothing in particular. "I'm going to be fine," he said. "The project. I'll find something." "I know you will." He exhaled. "I hate the feeling. The floor going out. After 3 years of building something stable, one call, and it feels like nothing's solid," she said. "Yeah. That feeling's a liar," she said quietly. "The stability is real. One client doesn't change the foundation." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "You should have sent the 43-point plan." She bumped his shoulder with hers. "Absolutely not. 11 of them were bad ideas." Summer arrived and the city opened up in the way Denver summers did. People outdoors, the mountains accessible and green, the evenings long and warm, and the air clean enough to remind you why you lived here. Sophie's school year ended with a ceremony that Lucas attended and that Natalie attended at his invitation, sitting 3 rows behind him, which they'd agreed was the right geometry for now. Present, but not inserted into the family front in a way that created friction before anyone was ready. Victoria was at the ceremony. Lucas saw her from across the gymnasium. She looked tired, he thought, but also something else. More settled, maybe. Less braced. The therapist was doing work, or time was, or the accumulated exhaustion of sustained anger had started to lift because sustained anger was its own kind of cost. They nodded at each other across the room. It was small, and it was enough. Sophie received an award for her science fair project. The judge had added a personal commendation about her exceptional analytical methodology, which Sophie received with the specific expression of someone who'd expected nothing less and was gratified to have this confirmed. Lucas applauded. Victoria applauded. Natalie, 3 rows back, applauded with everyone else. Afterward, in the parking lot, Sophie found Natalie before Lucas did. She crossed the blacktop with the focused direction of someone on a specific mission and stopped in front of Natalie and held out a folded piece of paper. "I printed this for you," Sophie said. "It's an article about the James Webb imaging of the pillars of creation. The new high-resolution one. I thought you'd want to see it." Natalie took it, looked at Sophie. "Thank you." "You've been busy since you moved," Sophie said, not reproachfully, observationally. "I didn't want you to miss it." "I haven't been great at responding to your emails," Natalie said. "It's okay. You're transitioning." Sophie said the word with the authority of someone who'd heard it used correctly enough to own it. "That takes a lot of energy. I understand." Natalie looked at this 6-year-old child standing in a school parking lot, handing her an article about space telescopes with the solemn considerateness of someone 3 times her age. And something in Natalie's face did something that Lucas, watching from 10 feet away, had not seen it do before. Not the executive composure, not the real smile. Something underneath both of those. Something that looked like being genuinely moved and not entirely knowing where to put it. "I'll read it tonight," Natalie said. "The pillars of creation are 7,000 light years away," Sophie said. "But we can see them. We built something that can see 7,000 light years." She paused. "That seems important." "It does," Natalie agreed. Sophie nodded, satisfied, and went to find Lucas. Natalie stood in the parking lot holding the folded article, and Lucas walked over to her and she looked at him and said simply, "She's extraordinary." And he said, "I know." And she said, "You should be terrified of how much she's going to accomplish." And he said, "Every single day." And neither of them said anything else, because there was nothing else that needed to be said right then. The ordinary moment containing everything it needed to. It was in late July that Natalie told him about the offer from the board. Not the Denver position, she'd accepted that months ago, but a new one. The global strategy role they'd created for her in recognition of what the Denver expansion was already becoming. It would keep her in Denver, keep her building the division she'd chosen, but expand her authority across the whole company. More responsibility, more visibility. The kind of position that 18 months ago she'd have said was the only thing she wanted. "It's everything I would have said yes to immediately a year ago," she told him. They were on her couch, late evening, the city doing its summer night thing outside the casement windows. "But," he said, "but I kept thinking when they described it, I kept thinking, where does this leave the time? Where does this leave Tuesday nights? Where does this leave Sophie's emails?" She looked at him, and I realized I was measuring the offer against things that didn't even exist a year ago. "Is that bad?" "No," she said. "It's just different. I'm different. I didn't know I was going to be this different." He looked at her on the couch in her apartment in Capitol Hill. The empty room that had filled itself with her life over 2 months. Books on the shelves and a rug she'd found at an estate sale and a photograph of the pillars of creation that Sophie had printed at full size and presented to her with a frame she'd decorated herself, which was currently hanging on the wall above the television because there had been no world in which it wasn't going to hang somewhere prominent. "What are you going to do?" he said. "I'm going to take it," she said, "because it's the right decision for the company, and because I'm still the same person who built that company, and I don't want to lose that." A pause. "But I'm going to set limits, real ones. Not the limits I used to set that I'd blow through the first time something needed my attention." She looked at her hands. "I've been talking to my therapist about the difference between commitment and disappearance." "What's the difference?" "Commitment you come back from," she said. "Disappearance you don't." He thought about those months of carrying everything alone after the divorce, the way survival had become a habit that eventually started to look like preference. The armor that fit so well, you forgot it was armor. "Yeah," he said. "I know something about that." She looked at him sideways. "I know you do." They sat with that for a while. The city outside, the photograph of the pillars of creation above the television. "I have something to ask you," she said. He turned to look at her. Something in her voice had changed, steadier, the way she got when she was about to say something she'd prepared. "Okay," he said. "It's not—" She stopped, recalibrated. "It's a question, a real one. Not a plan, not a proposal, just a question." "Natalie." "Where is this going?" she said. "For you, not for me. I know where it's going for me. Where is it going for you?" He was quiet for a moment, not because he didn't know, because the knowing was large and he was trying to find the right edge of it to say out loud. "You know where it's going," he said. "I want to hear it," she said. "I need to hear it. Not because I'm insecure about it, I'm not, but because we've both spent a long time learning to be in a life that made sense to us alone. And I want to make sure we're building the same thing." She met his eyes, steady, direct. "I need to know we're looking at the same future." He looked back at her, the woman who had emailed his daughter about space telescopes and hunted down an out-of-print astronomy book and sat in a parking lot for 7 minutes trying to appear calm before coffee, who had stayed on the phone through the custody letter and the hard conversations and the nights when he'd been too closed off to ask for what he needed, who had moved 1,800 miles not as a sacrifice but as a choice, the clear-eyed kind, the kind that cost something and was worth it. He took her hand. "I'm looking at you," he said. "That's the future I'm looking at." She held his hand, looked down at it. When she looked back up, her eyes were clear, but something in them was full. "Okay," she said, the words soft and certain. "Okay." Outside, Denver did its ordinary summer night business. The city noise, the warm air, the mountains invisible now in the dark, but still there, still permanent, as they always were. Sophie was across the city at his apartment with his mother, probably reading something about space. Victoria was somewhere across the city too, living her own life forward, painfully and imperfectly, the way everyone did. And Lucas Bennett sat in an apartment in Capitol Hill, holding the hand of a woman he had found by accident, kept by choice, and was now, without drama or performance, building something real with. It was not a clean story. It was not a simple one. Every part of it had cost something, and the costs weren't done, and the complications had more chapters left. But it was his. It was theirs. And for the first time in a very long time, that was enough. The question Lucas had asked himself in that airport drop-off lane 11 months ago, "What is this, exactly?" had a shape now. Not a clean shape. Not the kind you draw with a ruler. More like something that had grown organically in the way real things grew, with irregular edges and weight in unexpected places, and a few scars from where it had been stressed and held. But it was solid. You could put your hand on it and feel the substance of it. August settled over Denver with the particular heat of Colorado summers, dry and direct, the sun feeling closer than it had any right to be, the mountains in the distance shimmering slightly at midday. Lucas had landed 2 new clients in July after the Greenfield collapse, smaller contracts but steadier ones, and the freelance business had stabilized in the way it periodically needed to. Not dramatically, just incrementally, the way you bailed water from a boat that wasn't sinking, just taking on more than you wanted. He was okay. He was actually, genuinely okay. Sophie turned 7 in August. She requested a space-themed birthday party with the specificity of a project manager. She wanted the decorations to be scientifically accurate, meaning no cartoon planets with faces, no stars with 5 points because stars were not 5-pointed, and the cake needed to have a 2-scale solar system on it, or nothing at all. The bakery they called about the cake had been silent for a long moment on the phone and then said they'd do their best. The best turned out to be impressive. The relative sizes were roughly correct, Jupiter was appropriately enormous, and Saturn had actual rings. Sophie had inspected it with the solemnity of a quality control inspector and declared it acceptable. Natalie had come with balloons and a book about the history of women in astronomy and a framed print of the first image ever taken by the James Webb Telescope. The deep field image, thousands of galaxies in a patch of sky the size of a grain of sand held at arm's length. Sophie had held the frame in both hands for a while and then looked up at Natalie and said simply, "This is the best one yet," which Lucas understood meant the best gift, which was a significant verdict from a 7-year-old with extremely clear standards. The party itself was loud and imperfect in the way children's birthday parties were. 3 kids from Sophie's class running in directions that didn't coordinate, someone spilling punch on the living room rug, the solar system cake cut unevenly so that Neptune ended up in 2 pieces, which Sophie found briefly distressing before deciding it was actually fine, because Neptune had a complicated orbital relationship with Pluto anyway. Victoria had come. That was the thing. That was the part that still registered as significant even weeks later when Lucas thought about it. Victoria had come to Sophie's birthday party, and Natalie had been there, and the 2 of them had occupied the same living room for 3 hours, and the world had not ended. It had not been comfortable. He was not going to pretend it had been comfortable. Victoria had arrived with a gift and a careful expression, and she and Natalie had moved around each other for the first hour with the polite precision of 2 people who were both trying very hard to make a child's birthday good, and were setting aside everything else to do it. They'd sat at different ends of the room. They'd spoken to each other twice, once about the cake, once about parking, and both exchanges were brief and neutral and survivable. But when Sophie had blown out her candles and everyone had clapped, Lucas had looked across the room and seen Victoria looking at her daughter with a love that was so total and uncomplicated that it was almost hard to see directly, the way you couldn't look straight at something very bright. And in that moment, he'd understood something he'd been slowly working toward for months, that Victoria was not his enemy and had never been his enemy. She was just a person who had loved him perfectly and been loved imperfectly, and had arrived at this particular birthday party with her heart still partly in pieces, and was choosing to set the pieces aside for 3 hours because her daughter was 7 and it was her birthday. He had never respected her more. After the party, after the other kids went home, and Sophie was on the couch, surrounded by gift wrapping in a state of content exhaustion, Victoria had found him in the kitchen while he was bagging up the trash. She'd stood in the doorway and looked at him and said, "She's happy, Lucas," with something in her voice that was not quite peace but was moving toward it. "Yeah," he said, "I need you to know that I see that." A pause. "It's hard, but I see it." He turned around. They looked at each other in his kitchen. 2 people with years of history between them, shared and failed and complicated. 2 people who had once been each other's primary person and now occupied a different kind of relationship that didn't have a clean word for what it was. "Thank you for coming today," he said. He meant it entirely. She nodded, picked up her bag, stopped in the doorway again. "She's good for her," she said quietly. "For Sophie." It seemed to cost something. "I can see that too." Then she left. Lucas stood in his kitchen with a trash bag in his hand for a long moment. Both things could be true. Pain and generosity, hurt and grace. The same person, the same moment, carrying all of it. He'd learned that from his daughter. September came and something shifted again. Not dramatically, just the incremental way important things shifted when you were paying attention. Natalie had been in Denver for 4 months. The Capitol Hill apartment had become genuinely hers. She'd stopped living in it like a hotel, stopped keeping the surfaces too clear, started leaving things where she actually put them, rather than where they were supposed to go. Lucas had noticed this and said nothing about it because it was good, and it was hers to notice on her own timeline. They had fallen into a rhythm that was neither his old life nor her old life, but something genuinely new. Tuesday evenings at her place. Sunday mornings where Sophie would sometimes come with Lucas and Natalie would make coffee badly. She was a catastrophically bad cook. This had been established early, the kind of bad that wasn't charming so much as genuinely impressive in its consistency. And Sophie would eat cereal she'd brought herself and read an article aloud about whatever she was currently absorbed in, while Natalie listened with the focused attention she brought to things that interested her. And Lucas sat across from both of them at the small table by the casement windows and felt the full complicated weight of how much his life had changed. It was on one of those Sunday mornings, the second week of September, that Natalie came back from the kitchen with 2 cups of coffee and sat down and said, "I want to ask you something." He was used to this phrasing from her now. It was her tell. The announcement before the real thing, the way she gave herself and the other person a moment to settle before saying what she actually meant. "Okay," he said. Sophie was on the couch with a book, 3 feet away. This apparently did not concern Natalie, which told him something. "My lease is up in March," she said. He looked at her. "I've been thinking about it since July," she said. "I haven't been impulsive about it. I want to say that first. I've thought about it from every direction, and I've talked to my therapist about it, and I've made a list of all the reasons it could go wrong and worked through them. She put her coffee down. I'd like to move closer. You're 4 miles away, he said. Closer than that, she said, if you want that too. He held very still. Sophie turned a page on the couch without looking up. You mean? He stopped. Not tomorrow, she said quickly. Not next month, March. That's 6 months. We have time to do it right. Figure out what it looks like for Sophie, have the conversations we need to have, make sure everyone is ready. She was watching him with that level attention, steady, reading him the way she did. But I want to know if you want it, before I start planning the how. I need the yes first. He looked at her across the table in her apartment on a Sunday morning in September. The casement windows were open and the September air was coming through, cooler now, the first suggestion of fall at the edges of it. The Pillars of Creation photograph was on the wall. Sophie's cereal bowl was on the counter. The photograph of the meteorite that Sophie had taken on her phone and printed and given Natalie for the apartment was on the bookshelf. All of it ordinary, all of it entirely real. Sophie, Lucas said. Sophie looked up from her book. Yeah? What do you think about the idea of Natalie living closer? Sophie looked at Natalie, then at her father. The specific assessment of a 7-year-old who had learned very young that adults asked her opinion more often when they'd already made up their minds than when they genuinely didn't know. I think you've both already decided, she said, and you're asking me to make you feel better about it. Natalie made a sound that was half laugh and half something more helpless. That's not, Lucas started. It's okay, Sophie said. I want her closer too. She's our person now. She said it with the total certainty of someone for whom the conclusion had been obvious long enough that discussing it felt redundant. Then she went back to her book. Lucas looked at Natalie. Natalie looked at Lucas. Our person, Natalie said quietly. Yeah, he said. That's Sophie's way of saying welcome to the family. Something crossed Natalie's face that she didn't entirely manage, full and complicated and real. The kind of feeling that arrived without permission when something you'd wanted longer than you could name finally showed up and turned out to be exactly what you thought it would be, and nothing like what you expected. Okay, she said, for the third time in their relationship that a single word had carried everything. Okay, he said back. The 6 months that followed had the quality of something being built carefully and honestly. Not rushed, not performing, just two people and a child constructing a shared life with the same attention you brought to anything you wanted to last. They had the hard conversations before they happened, rather than after. What shared space looked like when one of them needed to disappear into work, what Sophie's routines required and where flexibility lived, what Victoria needed to know and when, how to fight. Because they did fight twice. Real ones, not the polished disagreements of people still auditioning for each other, but the actual conflicts of people with real personalities and real blind spots. And what mattered was that they came back from both of them knowing each other better than before. Natalie told him once, after the second fight, a bad one, voices raised, a door closed harder than it needed to be, an hour of separate silences before one of them picked up the phone, that she'd spent the whole hour certain he wasn't going to call, that the default program running in her was waiting for the exit. That every relationship she'd been in had had a point where the other person found the distance easier than the proximity, and she'd become so accustomed to that outcome that she'd started expecting it before it happened. I called, he said. I know, she said. I know you called. I'm going to keep calling, he said. That's not going to stop being true. She'd been quiet for a moment. I'm working on believing that, she said. It's not you. It's a habit. I know, he said. I've got habits too. We'll work on them. Neither of them was fixed. That was the truth of it. Neither of them came into this whole. Lucas still went quiet under stress more than he should. Natalie still occasionally treated a relationship conversation like a strategy session, trying to solve the emotional problem with a framework when what it needed was just her presence. Sophie was 7 and brilliant, and sometimes exhausting, and occasionally said things at dinner that were so precisely true that both adults at the table had to look at their plates for a moment. They were all three of them imperfect people trying to be honest about it, and that was the best version of this anyone could ask for. The proposal happened in October, a year, almost exactly, from the accidental swipe that had started everything. Lucas had not planned it formally. There was no reservation at a fancy restaurant, no elaborate staging, no ring hidden in a dessert. He'd bought the ring 6 weeks earlier after a conversation with Marcus that had lasted 45 minutes and involved Marcus saying, "Just do it, man," approximately 11 times in various configurations. The ring was simple. He'd known what she'd want without asking. Nothing performative, nothing designed to be photographed, just something real and well-made and meant to last. He'd been carrying it for 6 weeks trying to find the right moment, and then realized gradually that he was waiting for a perfect moment that wasn't coming, because their life didn't have perfect moments. It had real ones. And real ones were what they had built. It was a Tuesday evening, her apartment. The casement windows were open despite the October chill because she liked the air. She was at the counter going through something on her laptop, and he was on the couch reading something he wasn't actually reading. Sophie was at his mother's. The city was doing its ordinary Tuesday thing outside. "Hey," he said. "Hmm?" she said, not looking up. "Come here." She looked up then, read his face, the Natalie face, the one Sophie had named, the specific combination of nervous and like you got a good grade. She closed the laptop, walked over, stood in front of him. He reached into his jacket pocket and held it out to her. Not on one knee. He'd thought about that, and it had felt wrong for them. 2. Performance. Not enough like the people they actually were. He was just sitting there, holding out a ring box in both hands like it was something he'd been carrying for a while and was ready to put down. She looked at the box, looked at him. "Lucas," she said. "Marry me," he said. Not a question exactly, more like a statement of what he was asking, plain and direct the way she liked things. She sat down next to him on the couch. Close. She took the box from his hands and opened it and looked at the ring for a long moment without saying anything. He waited. He was good at waiting for her now. Had learned the difference between her silences, which ones were processing and which ones were deciding and which ones were just feeling something fully before it turned into words. This was the last kind. "It's not a terrible idea," she said finally. He almost laughed. Almost. "High praise." "I've been thinking about it longer than you probably know," she said. She was still looking at the ring. "Since around March. Approximately." March was the lease conversation. "It started before the lease conversation," she said. "The lease conversation was a consequence. I had to work backwards." She looked up at him. "I had to make sure it was the right thing for the right reasons. Not fear, not filling something. Actually, right." And yes," she said. "It's actually right." He took the ring out of the box and put it on her hand, and she let him, sitting in the ordinary Tuesday evening light of her apartment, and neither of them said anything for a minute. There was no champagne, no one applauding. Just the city outside and the open window and the photograph of the pillars of creation on the wall and 2 people sitting together with the full weight of what they'd chosen to build. "Sophie's going to say she knew," Natalie said. "Sophie did know," Lucas said. "Before us?" "Almost certainly." Natalie looked at the ring on her hand. "She's going to be insufferable about it." "She's going to be magnificent about it," he said. "Those are the same thing with Sophie." She smiled. The real one. The off-camera one. He remembered the first time he'd seen it, in the profile photo, the off-guard laugh, the thing that had made him look twice even before he'd known who she was. He'd seen it 1,000 times since then, and it still did something to his internal architecture that he had no interest in becoming immune to. They told Sophie the following morning. Lucas drove to his mother's to pick her up and told her in the car on the way to Natalie's apartment because Sophie processed better in motion. He'd learned when the car was moving and she could look out the window. "We're engaged," he said. "Natalie and me." Sophie looked out the window at the passing Denver streets. The October light was good, clear and gold, the mountains visible ahead of them. "I know," she said. "Sophie, you had the face yesterday," she said. "And you were wearing your good jacket. You don't wear the good jacket for regular Tuesdays." "I can't get anything past you." "No?" she agreed pleasantly. "You can't." She was quiet for a moment. "Is she going to be my stepmother?" "She's going to be Natalie," Lucas said carefully. "What that means, what you call her, how you think about her, that's yours to figure out. There's no rush. Sophie thought about this with her window-watching seriousness. I don't think I need to decide right now what to call it, she said. It's enough to know what it is. Yeah, he said, it is. She's our person, Sophie said again. The same phrase, the same certainty, steady as anything. That's enough. The wedding was in August, a year almost to the day from Sophie's 7th birthday. They held it in the backyard of Lucas's house in Congress Park, which was now their house, had been for 4 months. The Capitol Hill apartment released when Natalie's lease came up, and the moving trucks came and went and boxes got unpacked with a combination of efficiency and chaos that had involved one broken lamp and a disagreement about the bookshelf configuration that had been resolved by Sophie making an executive decision and arranging the books by subject matter, which turned out to be correct. The backyard was strung with lights. Not elaborate, not catered into submission, real, which meant that Lucas's friend Marcus had spent most of the afternoon wrestling with extension cords, and there was a moment at 4 p.m. when it appeared the whole system might short out, which it did not, though it flickered once during the ceremony and everyone laughed. 50 people, friends, colleagues, family in the complicated configuration that their lives had assembled. Lucas's mother Carol in the front row, emotional in the controlled way she was emotional about everything. Natalie's parents, who had driven in from Cincinnati and had met Lucas twice and on both occasions seemed to be deciding something about him that they hadn't announced yet. Marcus and his wife in the middle rows, colleagues from Natalie's Denver division. Lucas's oldest client, who had become something more like a friend over 3 years of working together. And Victoria. She sat in the back row. She had RSVP'd 3 weeks before the wedding, a brief text to Lucas that said I'd like to come, if that's all right. For Sophie. He'd said yes immediately and had told Natalie, and Natalie had said good, which was the right word in the right register. Not effusive, not performed, just good. The right thing is happening. Victoria sat in the back row in a blue dress and watched her sister marry her ex-husband and did not fall apart, which was the bravest thing Lucas had ever seen anyone do. He saw her from the front of the yard during the ceremony. She was looking at Sophie mostly. Sophie, who was standing up front in a yellow dress she had selected herself after rejecting 11 others, holding the ring pillow with the solemnity of someone entrusted with a significant scientific instrument, and who had earlier in the day informed both Lucas and Natalie that she had prepared remarks she intended to deliver at the reception whether or not she was scheduled to speak. She was not scheduled to speak. She spoke anyway. She stood up during the dinner portion, when the speeches were technically done, and said, I have something to say. And the table went quiet because Sophie had that quality. When she decided she had something to say, the room listened without knowing why it was listening. I'm 7, she said, almost 8. And I know some things, and I don't know other things. I know that Voyager 1 is past the heliopause, and it took 46 years to get there. I know that the pillars of creation are being destroyed by radiation right now, but we can't see it yet because the light hasn't reached us. I know that most of the asteroid belt is empty space, even though it looks crowded on maps. She paused. The backyard was completely quiet. I also know that my dad was lonely for a long time, and he tried to pretend he wasn't, she said, with the directness of a child who had no investment in the comfortable version of a true thing. And I know that Natalie was lonely too, even though she had a big company and a nice apartment. And I know that they found each other by accident, and it was weird and complicated and hard. She looked at both of them. But the best things usually are. Lucas was not going to cry. He was a grown man at his own wedding, and he was absolutely not going to cry in front of 50 people. He cried. Quietly, the way he did most things. Not a production, just the involuntary overflow of something that had been full for a long time. Natalie's hand found his under the table. She was not crying, which was very Natalie, but her jaw was set in the way it got when she was holding something with effort. I've thought about what to call Natalie, Sophie continued. I decided I'm going to keep calling her Natalie, because that's who she is. Not a category, just her. A pause. But she's also ours. And I think that's the most important kind of belonging there is. Not what you're supposed to be, just who you actually are to the people who know you. She sat back down. The backyard was silent for exactly 3 seconds. Then someone started clapping, and it built fast. And Lucas heard Carol making the sound she made when she was refusing to cry, which meant she was crying, and Marcus was saying something to his wife that made her laugh. And across the yard in the back row, Victoria was clapping too, her hands together, quiet and real. And she was looking at Sophie with an expression that had grief in it and love in it and something that was working toward acceptance, slowly, the way real things moved. Later that night, after the guests had gone and the lights were still strung, and the backyard had that particular quality of a space where something real had happened, Lucas found Natalie standing at the edge of the yard looking up at the sky. August sky, late, the heat of the day mostly gone. The stars were doing their best despite the city light. "Hey," he said. "Hey." She didn't look down. She was looking at something specific up there, or maybe nothing, maybe just the dark. He stood next to her. "What are you looking at?" "Trying to find anything," she said. "It's hard in the city." "Sophie says you can see Mars sometimes in August," he said, "low on the western horizon." Natalie looked west. "Is that it?" He looked. A point of light, slightly reddish, sitting just above the roofline. "Might be." 7 minutes ago," she said. He looked at her. "That's how long the light from Mars takes to reach us," she said. 7 minutes, roughly, depending on where we are in orbit relative to each other. She looked at the point of light. "We're seeing it 7 minutes in the past. Right now. We never see anything as it actually is, only as it was." "Sophie teach you that?" "She sent me an article," Natalie said. "In March. About light travel time." He looked at the point of light that might be Mars. 7 minutes of history reaching them. The present that was always slightly in the past. "She emailed me the day I signed the lease in Denver," Natalie said. The article was about how the farther away something is, the older the light we see from it. And she said, a small pause. She said she thought that was probably why people held on to the past too long sometimes. Because the further away they got from something, the older the version of it they were seeing, and it was easy to mistake old light for the real thing. Lucas was quiet. "She was 7, Natalie said. "She's always been like that," he said. "I know." She finally looked down from the sky. At him. His wife, who was his wife now, which was still a fact he was assembling. "I spent a long time looking at old light," she said. "Old versions of myself. Old versions of what I thought I needed. Old damage." She looked at him steadily in the backyard dark. "You're not old light." "No," he said. "You're right now," she said simply. "You and Sophie and this ridiculous backyard with the lights that almost shorted out." He smiled. "Marcus did his best." "Marcus did adequately," she said, which was how she said it when she didn't want to damn with faint praise but also valued accuracy. He took her hand. They stood in the backyard under the string lights and the city-washed sky, and he thought about a kitchen at 11:47 p.m. a year and some months ago. The cold coffee, the open laptop, the exhausted, thoughtless swipe of a thumb. The way nothing that had followed had been intended, planned, or remotely predictable. The way the best thing that had ever happened to him had come from the worst possible direction at the worst possible time and had been, from the first uncomfortable message onward, exactly what it needed to be. He thought about Voyager 1 out past the heliopause, still moving, still transmitting its thin signal through the dark after 46 years. Still going, still saying, "I am here. I exist. I have traveled this far." There was something in that. He wasn't sure he could explain it. Sophie would be able to explain it, probably with an article attached. The persistence of things that were launched with intention and then simply kept moving. The way a signal kept transmitting even when the source was unimaginably far from where it started. The way distance didn't have to mean silence. The way you could travel an enormous distance from everything you once were and still be sending something true. "I have something I need to tell you," he said. Natalie looked at him. "That sounds serious." "It's not serious," he said. "It's just, I've been thinking about saying it for a while, and tonight seems like the right time." "Okay." Steady, present. "I'm not the same person I was 2 years ago," he said. "Before all of this. And I don't mean that in the way people say it to mean they've improved or grown or whatever. I just mean," he searched for it. "I was managing before. I was holding it together. I was doing everything that needed doing, and I was fine. But fine isn't..." He stopped. "You're not fine. You're something else, something I didn't know I still had room for. She was watching him in the way she watched things she wanted to understand completely. I didn't know I was lonely, he said. That's the true part. I thought I'd just gotten used to it. I thought it was the price of everything else, Sophie, the work, the life. I didn't know that what I'd actually done was forget what it felt like to be known by someone. She was very still. You know me, he said, the actual version. Not the one I present when I'm trying to hold things together. The one who goes quiet under stress and second guesses himself and checks on his kid too many times because he's afraid of losing things. He held her hand tighter. You know that one. And you stayed. Natalie looked at him for a long moment. Her eyes were clear and full simultaneously, the way they got when she was feeling something precisely. You stayed too, she said, when it was hard. When Victoria says, yes. When I went quiet, yes. When I tried to solve your feelings with a 43-point plan, which I would actually like to read someday. Never, she said. The real smile. They stood in the August night with the string lights above them and the city beyond the fence and the slight sound of someone still inside cleaning up, probably Marcus, who was the kind of friend who stayed and cleaned up. And neither of them needed to say anything else because the thing had been said, the true version of it, and it was out in the air between them and they both knew what it weighed. What Lucas understood, standing there, was something he didn't have a clean framework for and had stopped trying to build one. Life didn't give you the people you planned for. It gave you accidents and complications and timing that made no logical sense. And inside the mess of that, if you were paying attention, if you didn't close off too fast, if you stayed honest even when the honesty was expensive, inside all of that mess, occasionally, you found something real. Something that had no business existing given how it started but existed anyway, insistently, with all the permanent peculiarity of a meteorite that had been floating through space for 4 billion years before landing in a 7-year-old's hands and becoming, simply, hers. He had not been looking for this. He had been exhausted and half asleep and going through the motions of a life that was full and still somehow hollow. One careless swipe. And then, everything. Not easy, not clean, not the story anyone would have planned or recommended or called sensible, but real in every direction. Real in the ways that hurt and the ways that held, real in the backyard and the kitchen and the science fair and the parking lot and the February porch, and the 50 people who had come tonight and the one who had sat in the back row because she was still building her way toward something, as all of them were, as everyone always was. Sophie came out of the house in her yellow dress, which now had a small smear of wedding cake on the hem that she did not appear to have noticed or would not have cared about if she had. She walked over to where they were standing and looked up at the sky. Mars is probably visible tonight, she said. We were just looking, Natalie said. Low and west, Sophie said. She pointed. That one. That's what we thought, Lucas said. Sophie looked at it for a moment. 7 minutes old, she said, to no one in particular and both of them at once. Yeah, Lucas said. That's still pretty close, she decided. She took one of each of their hands, Natalie's left, Lucas's right, with the matter-of-fact ownership of someone arranging a configuration that was already obvious and simply needed to be physically established. They stood like that, the three of them, in the August backyard under the strung lights, looking at a point of light above the roofline that might be Mars, that was probably Mars, that was sending them light from 7 minutes in the past that had traveled across an incomprehensible distance to land in their eyes on this specific Tuesday-turned-Wednesday night in Denver, Colorado, in the backyard of a life that had begun with an accident and become, against all odds, exactly this. Not perfect, not resolved into simplicity. Victoria was still in her own process. The company was still demanding. The freelance work still had bad months. Sophie was still going to say things at dinner that made both adults look at their plates. All of it was ongoing. All of it was real. But the three of them stood in the backyard and held on to each other in the dark. And that was enough. That had always been enough. Some things, it turned out, were not found by searching. They arrived sidelong by mistake, at the exact wrong moment, from the exact wrong direction. And the only thing that determined whether they became something was whether you were awake enough to recognize them when they showed up, and whether you were brave enough, despite the cost, to stay. Lucas Bennett had been half asleep on a Tuesday night with cold coffee and an open laptop and a thumb that moved without thinking. The rest he had chosen, Every single day, deliberately, imperfectly, with everything he had. That was the whole story. That was all of it.